Ready? Ooh, we're live. We're wired for sound. All right, it's 9:07 a.m. and it is Tuesday, April 11th, 2023, and I'm going to call the work session of the Board of Trustees to order. Before we move on to the next item, I would like to welcome Dr. Susan Enfield to make a statement.
Thank you, President Smith, and good morning, trustees. Good morning, everybody. I appreciate you all being here. Before we move forward with this presentation and discussion on our strategic planning process, I want to note that Mutu Fagbai of Performance Fact, who has been leading this work, had a tragic loss in his family and will not be with us today. However, Rose Wagner, who is one of his partners and has been instrumental in leading the work here, was here with us, and the work will proceed. So obviously we send our condolences to Mutu and his family during this difficult time. I also, before we turn it over back to President Smith to launch the meeting, I want to thank Michelle Anderson and her team for coordinating so much of the work around the strategic planning process. It is not for the faint of heart. I also want to very much thank all of the staff and community members on our teams and committees who have given their time, their talent, their expertise to chart the course for our district for the next several years. And I'm excited for you all to hear and weigh in on the good work that they have been doing. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to item 1.02, our roll call. JJ, if you could do that, please.
Trustee Church.
Here.
Trustee Mayberry.
Here.
Trustee Nicolette.
Good morning.
Trustee Rodriguez.
Trustee Rodriguez is not able to be with us due to a professional commitment.
President Smith.
Here.
Trustee Westlake.
Good morning.
Trustee Woodley.
Here.
Madam President, you have a quorum.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, moving on to item 1.03. So the Washoe County School District has been in the news for many positive reasons lately. And one of the people working in the not-so background with that is our amazing Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Sengdao Keo. So I would like to invite her to lead us in the pledge. All right, everyone. So we'll go ahead and close out section 1, opening items, and we'll move on to section 2, our items for presentation. We have 2 items for today's special meeting. And we'll go ahead and open item 2.01. This is the presentation, discussion, and possible action on guidance to Performance Fact, Inc. by the Board of Trustees in order for the board to provide input during the district-wide strategic planning process, with the strategic plan coming back to the board for final decisions in June 2023. This is an item for possible action. As Dr. Enfield mentioned, she'll be leading us through this presentation, and we welcome Rose Wagner on behalf of Performance Fact. Thank you so much for being with us today. And before you start, I do just want to add on to what Dr. Enfield said. The work that has gone into this so far has been incredible. Hundreds of members of our staff, our families, neighbors have joined meetings, committee meetings, to bring this plan to the point where the Board of Trustees will see today, and we'll also have the opportunity to have our voices heard in that process. So thank you very much to everyone, and we're very excited to see what you have. And Ms. Wagner, thank you for being here.
Yes, good morning. Good to see all of you. And thank you, Dr. Enfield, for your condolences for Mutiu. It's tragic, but he is definitely here in spirit. He wishes he could be here, but I'm going to do my best to channel the Mutiu wisdom and all that wisdom for you all today. So let me get set up here and share my screen to do. Let's see. And so Mutu would say that this is the most important slide. I know that we presented back in February, but there's a couple of things that we're just going to kind of go over you just to ground before going into the work to date. He would say this is the most important slide because it helps you all learn how to say his name, Mutiu. But for us, it's also an important slide just to reiterate the fact that we are facilitators in the process. We're here to help bring together diverse voices and help really Washoe County, as Mutiu would say, live its bliss, right? How do we ensure that we're moving forward strategically for our young people and in service of them? And so I just wanted to pause and make that note. And so the other thing I just want to note, so thank you. We got the kind of feedback that there was a mistake on this slide. I have updated my slide. So your slide might be a little bit different. Particularly, we had our white percentage off. And so I apologize for that, but the mistake was heard and we have made that correction.
Oh, thank you, Ms. Wagner.
So I'm going to spend just a few. Sorry, did I hear
Sorry,
something?
Ms. Wagner. I want to say thank you for that. And then I also wanted to say thank you to Trustee Church for actually noticing that. So thank you so much for that change. Thank you, Ms. Wagner. Please continue.
Yeah, apologies. We made that correction earlier, and then I think somewhere, you make a copy of a slide deck and it's the wrong one. So I apologize for that. We're going to spend just a few minutes with the data. I'm sure you all are familiar with some of the data, but we always want to anchor our work with the kids and the experiences that they're having in our schools at this time. And so some of our data is organized in a way where we look at it in terms of out of 20 kids. So if we think of 20 people in a room, we'll see that about 9 of them are going to be white in the Washoe County. About 8 of them are going to be Hispanic. Again, these are roundings because we don't have partial people. But this is just a chance to kind of think about who's in the room, who's in the classrooms here in our district. Another way of thinking about it is different learner profiles. So about 3 students will have disabilities, about 3 will be English learners, and about 9 out of every 20 students will be economically disadvantaged. And we would be remiss not to start here. This slide, this data set in particular has had a strong reaction, especially on our alignment team and some of the community members in thinking about kindergarten readiness. And so these data are really showing us out of every 20 students, about how many of them are going to be ready for kindergarten. And so if we look at the bottom row, apologize, let me zoom. Let me make this a little bit bigger. Here we go. We look at the bottom row, we can see that district-wide, about 7 out of every 20 students are ready for kindergarten in the 21-22 school year, compared to, for our white students, about 11 out of every 20 students are ready for kindergarten. 2 out of every English learner students are ready for kindergarten, and so on and so forth. And so this is just something to again, just be considering what are the experiences that our young people have going into schools at this moment in service of where do we want to go and where do we want to prioritize. Another data set I just want to quickly, again, kind of ground ourselves in is the intersectionality data. So these data are really separated by race as well as economic status. And this is meant so that we can understand how the impact of race might compound with the economic status of our young people. And so, for example, on this first row here, proficient, this is the number of students that would be proficient on the state assessment in English or in the ELA. So, for example, all the way over on the right, we have about 14 out of every 20 white students are going to be proficient on ELA. But if you compare that to white students that are economically disadvantaged, you'll see that about 7 out of every 20 white students will be proficient on the ELA assessment. If we compare that to Hispanics, again, about 10 out of every 20 Hispanic students will be proficient on the ELA assessment. And if we compare that to economically disadvantaged Hispanic students, we'll see that about 5 out of every 20 were proficient. And so across the board, you can see that economic disadvantage is having a pretty significant impact, regardless of race, for the students in Washoe County. We can also consider just, right, who's engaged and also doing well in rigorous coursework. The rigorous coursework we looked at here are students who are passing at least one AP or IB exam. So district-wide, we can see that about 28% of students are passing at least one AP exam or IB exam. Compared to Hispanic or Latino, that's about 21%. White's about 34%. Gifted and talented down at the bottom, 73%. We have CTE pathway and
Ms. Wagner, one moment,
Yes.
please. I see Vice President Nicolette has her light on.
Thank you.
Thank you for stopping me.
Hello, Rose. I noticed that on this slide 7, you do reference gifted and talented, and my question is, on slide 4, gifted and talented is not indicated. That is a profile of our students. You've got students with disabilities, English learners, economically disadvantaged, and I'm wondering if you can provide the, out of every 20 students, how many are gifted and talented? Thank you.
For this data set here, at this moment, I can't, but we can take a look into our data set and see if we can get that called out.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. We have a much larger data booklet. These data displays are pulled from that. There's significantly more. I can get into the gifted and talented for this slide. You said slide 5, correct?
Slide 4.
Slide 4, thank you.
And my reference was that we are on slide 7, achievement in rigorous coursework, and gifted and talented is at the bottom. It is indicated. And I just like the correlation in the slide 4. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Thank you for that feedback. All right. The last data I just want to ground us in before we start looking into the work to date is just the graduation rate for both 2022 and 2021. So just seeing what percentage of our students are actually graduating high school in that 4-year cohort time. And so, why plan, right? The primary role of planning is alignment. And so we're not asking, you can see here there are 2 different pictures of arrows, and the arrows on the left are kind of going in various directions, but the arrows on the right are going in the same direction. And we're not asking, say, the larger yellow arrow to change its shape or its colors. However, we are asking it to begin to point in the same direction as, say, that gray longer arrow. And so if you think about it also like a chiropractor, for me, I'm a firm believer in a chiropractor. I like going to them on a regular basis. It's not something I have to do, but I would be fine. I can function. I can live maybe in a little bit of discomfort, but I can definitely live and function in the world without going to see a chiropractor to realign my back. However, by going and getting that alignment, by getting things back in order, I can work more efficiently. I can be stronger. I can run more. All those kind of things that I like to do in life. So again, it's not that we can't work without alignment, but we are going to work more efficiently. We are going to work better if we can point in the same direction toward a few high priority things. And so that's really the primary purpose of planning as we see it. It's been really exciting to work with all of your community members. We've gotten to see a lot of them. We really believe in centering in on the diverse voices and bringing all those voices to the table as part of the strategic planning process. So we've met with a lot of teachers, we've met with a lot of administrators. We have a meeting with administrators this week, in particular, I believe that's on Thursday. We've met with some students, we have family engagements. Today we're presenting with all of you, with the school board. But it's important for all of those people to be at the table throughout the process so that more of us can begin to call out the things that are most important to us, and hopefully we can begin to agree on a few high priority things in service of the plan. And so some of the voices that we have various teams. One, we have the student voice team who's met once. We'll be able to engage with them 2 more times, I believe, before the end of the planning process. We have an instructional focus team. That team has met for 3 full days already. We have the principals and admin who are meeting this week. We have the alignment team, who is part of a broader community, so that's community members who come together and help us think through planning and help us think about how the community is engaged in the whole process. We've had, let's go to the next slide. We've had several community forums so far. So I believe last board update, back in February, one of the requests was to have a virtual community forum. We've been able to go ahead and add one of those in. So our last community forum will be on May 2nd. That will be a virtual community forum. So we're excited about that. We have already held 5 community forums. It's been great to go around and see all the different schools and engage with the different voices. And so that is all part of the work to date today. There was also another request, right, for the board members to have this session, and so I'm excited that we've been able to respond to that as well. But here you can see all the dates that are in black. Those are things that have already happened, and you can see that we still have about 2 meetings per team left to go before we hopefully finalize kind of a recommendation.
Ms. Wagner, could we stay on this slide for just a moment? So
Absolutely.
a couple bits of feedback. One is that I have heard spontaneously from people who have been at the community forums and have heard great feedback on the energy, about the engagement, and the fact that they're very excited to see their voices in the plan. I also want to point out for my colleagues that this is why doing our workshop today is at exactly the perfect time, because you can see the meetings that have already happened, which means that we've got a good foundation. We'll have the opportunity to layer our voices into that, and then we'll continue the work with the strategic plan. When we get to the discussion portion, we'll talk a little bit about what it is that we're really looking for from the trustees today, and I know Ms. Wagner and Dr. Enfield will add on that as well so that we understand the role that we are playing today. But I do want to point out that this was very specifically done because of what you see, what's happened so far, where we layer in, and then where the additional voices will come in and put the icing on top, and then it'll come back to the board in June. With that said, I see Vice President Nicolette.
Yes, thank you. This to me is a really important slide. I've tried to be at as many of these gatherings as possible. One thing for certain is that the hug gathering of the students was absolutely fabulous. Those students were spot on. Excuse me, allergies. They were engaged. They had innovative ideas. They shared their experiences. It was quite a gift to be able to watch them engage in the process. Community forums, I'm a little concerned about the participation in our community forums. My sense is that we are not engaging enough voices for whatever reason. It's not a judgment. I am wondering if we could add 1 or 2 more community forums, and I would maybe suggest that a forum be at a non-school venue. The Automobile Museum comes to mind, because I feel like we are not hearing enough voices from our community. Thank you.
And this is Michelle Anderson, Chief Communication and Community Engagement Officer. We definitely hear you. I just want to put the expectation out there. We have done some intentional outreach to our community members, gone out to different community groups. Obviously, we've shared on social media, we've sent out. I think we all know that community engagement, especially this time of the year, is a little bit difficult, and sometimes unless you're cutting a program, when you're only asking for input, people don't come in droves. But we will continue to promote. We've been working also with our community partners. The reason why we have held them at schools and also at TMCC is because of cost, and we're bringing in food, and so we're trying to be mindful about what that budget is if we're having community forums. and that's why we add the virtual. We can definitely look at adding more community forums to see if more people will participate. We've had, I would say, just, I know the one you attended had approximately 20, maybe a little bit under, and we've stuck around that number for most of them. It is unfortunate. You know, we've offered childcare, we've offered food, obviously, interpretation services. It just is not, we're just not getting the feedback that, and you guys have seen that when we've had budget town halls, et cetera, that we will definitely continue to work on getting more engagement. And we, at the end of the month, I'll be working with Rose and Performance Fact team, because we are going to be sending out an engagement survey. So families do not have to come and participate in person, but they will be able to participate online. We'll be doing a thought exchange.
Thank you, I appreciate that update. And I know that this is a busy town. There's a lot of great things going on. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Nicolette. All right, Ms. Wagner, thank you so much for that time.
Absolutely. Good to hear your voice, Trustee Nicolette. Sorry, I can't really see you. It's good to hear you. So before we dive into kind of the work to date, which I know you all are very excited about, just want to make sure that we pause to understand how it's kind of organized, how we organize our work. So the way that we organize our work is really around these three circles, always starting with the students at the center. So circle number one, it's about the kids. And so some of the things that align to the kids are the profile of a graduate, which we'll see today. We'll see the goals, what are the goals that we have prioritized for students, and what are the measures or the indicators to tell us how we're doing towards those goals. The excellent targets will come back in a little bit later. I'll talk about that when we get to the work to date. The second circle is about instruction, right? So we start with the kids. What do we want for kids? What do we want to be true for kids? What are the outcomes, the things that we're looking for? And then what is the instruction that is going to help those kids get home, right? And so we organize our instruction around these four pillars or these building blocks. I'm excited to share that with you all today. The community has done a really great job with those building blocks and where they're at. As well as what are the practices, what are the instructional practices for the teachers, for the leaders, for the organization that are gonna really impact that student learning, the students, right? And then we go out to circle number three, which is about the infrastructure. What are the structures that we need to have in place in service of instruction, in service of kids, to help more kids get home, right? And so we'll take a look at that. We're in a really good spot. As you saw on the calendar, we're about halfway through, and so we got a little bit more work to go. And what we have left is really about the infrastructure. But most of the core work with the students and the instruction is in a good place for today. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch over to our work to date document. I believe you all have it in front of you as well. So let me just do a new screen share. And so this is organized again by those three circles. So this is our work to date as of April 5th, which was right after our teams met last week. We were excited to be able to actually turn this around and put this in front of the community forum that we had that evening. So really trying to make sure that the work that we're getting feedback on and that we're putting out there is the latest, and it has integrated the most feedback so that we can continue to iterate and move forward. And so you'll see some numbers are in green. Green means go, but really green is just an indicator to us that it's good enough to really get some, like we might have some tweaking between now and the end of the strategic planning process. There might be some wordsmithing, depending on how the community engages or any feedback that you all give. We'll be making some tweaking, but it's pretty much good enough to begin to move on to the other aspects of the work. It's foundational enough that we can begin to build off of it, right? Because again, we can't really talk about instruction until we're really clear about the outcomes for kids. We can't really talk about infrastructure until we're really clear about what we want for kids and what we need instruction to look like. And so you can see that student learning is in a pretty good place. We'll be taking a look at the profile of the learner today. We'll be looking at the goals and measures. Instructional effectiveness is there. And we've started on some of the infrastructure around strategies. What are the strategies that we need to have in place in order to accomplish these goals for kids? Okay. And so,
Rose, this is Susan. I have a question. Thank you, President Smith. I know strategies. At what point in the conversation does the discussion around metrics, so measurement of progress and success, come in, or is that a sort of next iteration?
yeah, that's a great question. So in this kind of map, if you will, what you're talking about is what we call excellence targets. And so today we'll take a look at goals. We have the measures, so the indicators, but we haven't yet attached the excellence targets to that. So say the percentage of students that we're hoping to see within this indicator.
Right.
That will really come at the end once everything is really finalized, because we want to make sure that those metrics aren't necessarily going to change. Then we can add in the excellence targets or the percentages, if you will.
That makes perfect.
Go ahead.
No, sorry. That makes perfect sense. I just wanted to make sure that as the trustees and the public here, that we're identifying sort of what our main pillars are, and we start talking about strategies. We're going to be talking about metrics and measurement of progress as well.
Yes, absolutely. And so that might come before the kind of final presentation, or it might come right after it. It really depends. That's something that we can, it varies from district to district where that comes in. But that will be one of the last things that we do. Thank you for that. And so we have in your document, this is the vision, core beliefs as we grabbed them from you all. It was adopted by the board in May 2010. If there's an update, we can absolutely update our document. We just added this in here to kind of finalize the product. And so to start, we are hoping to start with the portrait of a learner. So a little bit of background, the portrait of a learner, or the sort of a portrait of a graduate. This really came from, it started with the core planning team. So the core planning team is our most diverse team. It's going to have teachers, it's going to have support staff, it's going to have some admin, it's going to have some community members, it has some students. So it's a really great mix of people. They're the ones who started out with kind of this idea. The instructional focus team has weighed in pretty heavily. They've been able to, they actually finalized this, right? They took some of the feedback from the core planning team that met the day before, and were able to sit down and really sit with the feedback, sit with our previous draft, and be able to produce kind of what you see today. And so they've really centered in 5 kind of bucket areas. What do we hope to be true for our graduates? So they are a skilled communicator and collaborator. They're a resilient learner. They are an inspired innovator. They have healthy mind and body, and they are a global citizen. And so these are kind of the 5 buckets. It started as, I believe, 7. So it was 7 different buckets, and they were really able to bring it down. Because one of the big pieces of feedback from the community and from everyone was that it was a lot. And so they were able to kind of bring it down to its core principles and have this today. And so, Dr. Enfield, I don't know if there's anything you want to add about this product. Otherwise, I'll take any questions or comments on the portrait before we move on to other products.
No, I think you can go on. Thanks, Ms. Widener.
Awesome. Great. Okay. And so the other piece that we have are the goals. Again, so we're still in circle number 1, which is about students. What do we want to be true for students? And so we have 5 goals for students. And again, this is something that's been worked on by every team, and we've been able to get it to honed in and got really clear about our outcome for kids.
Miss
And
Wagner, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. We had a funny little technical challenge. Could we just beep, beep, rewind 30 seconds and have you re-say what you just did while we all briefly had a heart
Absolutely.
attack? And now our
I saw
adrenaline's
the
coming
screen,
down.
like, turned on and off, and I was like, oh, I wonder what that's about. Okay.
We have a jar of
Okay,
nitroglycerin in the back for anybody who needs it, so.
It's okay. It happens. Technology, blessing and a curse. So we have our goals and measures for students. So again, we're staying here in circle number 1, which is about students. What do we want to be true? What are the outcomes that we want for kids? And so the core planning team, the instructional focus team, were really able to dial these in last week, and we feel like we're at a really good spot. So they have 5 different buckets. We like to kind of think of the first one as the beginning, so a strong start for early success. So this is about kind of pre-K through grade 3, as you can see. And then the end, you can see in goal number 5, is about transitions. It's about the other end. So we have kind of the beginning of the educational journey for young people. We have kind of the end of the educational journey for young people, and then everything in between. So centering in on student voice and advocacy, empowered, safe, supported, and connected students, academic growth toward achievement, and empowering all learners for their future. I do want to call out that one intentional word choice that the teams have began to center on is, instead of saying every student, they're saying every learner, so you can see that reflected here in these goals. And so that's just something I want to call out. I'll pause for a second and see if there are any questions or comments before I move on to the metrics.
Ms. Wagner, this is President Smith for the record. I am a big fan of number 2. I am really glad that student voice and their agency in their own education is something that has been identified and is being built into this. Because when education feels like it's happening to you, that's one thing. When it feels like your education is something that's happening with you at your direction, we're going to talk about the rest of the plan and all the different pathways that there are to education. I like all of these, but I'm really glad to see number 2 because that personal involvement really matters and how you see success in your life. Any other questions or thoughts from colleagues? Dr. Nicolette.
Thank you. I totally agree, that student voice. I remember when I was director of the Child Care Center up at TMCC, we would ask the toddlers in the preschools how it was going and what they needed and what they didn't like, and it was very insightful, and they don't hold back. So my question here is, in these 5 measures, I don't see parents and family, and that the absence of those words, it makes me a little uncomfortable, because I think it's extremely important to call out, to recognize, to name the importance of family and parent involvement. So help me through that, please, Rose.
Yes, I'm glad you pulled that out. I am personally an advocate for students and families. I think it's very important. So this is really, the goals are about students. We want to get really clear about the outcomes for students. And what you'll see in our next piece, so it's the pillars, is around that second layer, which is about instruction, which begins to engage families. So you'll see the families really clearly called out in our building blocks, so in our pillars.
So, Rose,
but the goals really center on students.
Yeah, because as a school system, our goals are for what our kids are going to be and achieve. How we engage, because the other thing you don't see in here is staff, right? And we have a commitment as well to our staff. So staff and families will feature prominently in the next layer, but ultimately we don't have a goal as a school system for our family. We have the responsibility to partner with our families in service of the goal of educating our children for the future of their choice. I don't know if that makes sense.
Diane Nicolette, for the record, I hear that, and I embrace that, and yet goals and measures of student progress, to me, one of the pillars is family and parent engagement, and we have known that for a very long time. We are hearing it very loud and strong with our parents and families. And although I see goals and measures of student progress, we cannot have goals and measures for student progress without family engagement, direct involvement. And so I personally would like to see that in here. I agree with you on the staff, absolutely. I don't think we can say it too much. Thank you.
So you mentioned the word pillars, so I want you to see where families and staff feature in the pillars moving forward.
Yeah. Just to give you a glimpse, right? So
Miss
the pillars,
Wagner,
you use
so
very
sorry.
strong language.
Miss Wagner, sorry,
We'll
I
get it here.
I know this is awkward because you can't actually see us. So really quick, so Vice President Nicolette, when we get to the next portion, when we enter into our discussion and we start talking about changes, let's, bring that back. And then I also, you're good? Okay. So, so I'm very glad that we broached that topic. And then when we get to the other side after public comment and we start talking about where we'd like to see our voices layered, let's definitely bring that conversation back. All right, thank you so much, Ms. Wagner.
Perfect. Thank you. Any other comments on the goals before I show you the measures? Excellent. It can be folded into the next piece. So on your next page, so this is where we really get the rubber hitting the road, right? So we have these aspirational goals, right? They're the aims. They're what we hope to be true for young people. But what's important at the end of the day is how are we actually going to measure that, right? And so again, the core planning team, the instructional focus team really did the most work within here. Again, the communities looked at this. The alignment team has looked on this. Students have looked at this. But they really began to articulate how will we begin to monitor our progress within this goal. And so here you can begin to see the things that we might put on a dashboard, for example, a dashboard that we would then be, reporting back and checking in on throughout the course of the implementation of the strategic plan. We can begin to see indicators of progress and also what places where we may need to pause, reflect, dig in, figure out how to better make some movement to attain these goals. Right. So I'll take any questions that we might have. Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Rose, under the empowered, safe, supported, connected students, what about, is there something in there, or maybe it's somewhere else, and I thought I saw it earlier and don't see it now, something around students, how are students connected to their school community? So be it through a club, sports, whatever it is, but can we have a measure that shows how students are connected to their community as well?
Yes, I believe that was maybe part of a previous draft.
Okay.
And then with the constraint of, say, three goals three measures to monitor, that might have been the one to fall off. That doesn't mean that we can't add it back on.
Okay.
But you're right, it was there at one point. And I think it does go underneath goal 3. So I'll bring that back. I'm writing that down as a comment to bring back for the team.
Thanks.
Of course. Okay. All right, so moving forward, so to Trustee Nicolette's point, the families are very important. So what we just looked at, right, the profile and the goals and measures, that was really about students and outcomes for students, making sure that we're really clear about where we want to go for them. Now we're starting to look into what we call pillars or building blocks, which is around circle number 2, which is about strong instruction. And so with that, we offer the organizational frame around 4 pillars. And those 4 pillars You can see here, this is the language that the teams have come up with, but just to give you an organizational kind of reference, we organize it around 4 different things. Pillar A is about teaching and learning. Pillar B is schools can't do it alone. And that's where your families, your community really comes into it. And we know that schools can't do it alone, so how are we gonna organize ourselves to be able to engage them, involve them? Pillar C is about investing in people. So how do we need to invest in people in order to bring more kids home? And then pillar D is about bringing it all together. That's really kind of the infrastructure. How are we making sure that it all comes together? Now that being said, you're going to see here at the bottom.
Ms. Wagner,
so-
Ms.
yeah.
Wagner, Vice President Nicolette wants to share something with that.
Thank you, President. Again, Rose and colleagues, I see Pillar B, strong partnerships. I want to voice very strongly and loudly that I see families as more than a partner. They are much more than a partner. Long after teachers and bus drivers and nutrition workers and custodians are no longer in a student's life, parents and families are there. They are the first and forever teacher. And I really feel that when we call families strong partners, there's a sense of being adjunct in their responsibility. It is first and foremost a parent family's responsibility to ensure that their child's education is top-notch, and they are the #1 advocate. And I will say it again, kind of on my high horse here, the way this is set up places families as adjunct, and I'm not okay with that. I want us to do a better job of placing parents and families at the top as the responsible person and the #1 and forever teacher of their most precious gift, a child, and here they're adjunct. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Nicolette. I know we want to get through this, but I definitely want to revisit that. I share the view of the importance of families and parents. Where I do think we have to understand how this falls, though, is that ultimately we're educating kids to become these global citizens, and the children are still the #1. But I very much agree with everything you're saying, and so I'm glad that we're going to have this conversation, because I don't want it to turn into a situation where we're certainly accountable to the parents and we're responsible to them, but at the end of the day, we're ultimately serving children first and foremost. I guess I'll just cut to the chase. What I worry about is that there's the idea that the parents would be able to come in and start making individual level decisions around their children's education, when really we set that curriculum at a high level, and so there's a real fine line there. And I don't know where that line is, but at the end of the day, we're responsible for kids. But I like where this conversation is going, and I'm definitely not disagreeing with you, and I'm glad that we'll have it so that we have an emphasis in the strategic plan that has a better balance. But I hear you loud and clear that you'd like to see it more represented in this. And so this is a great, great conversation. Thank you. All right, thank you, Ms. Wagner.
I do want to call out just a point of process. Typically, in the strategic planning process, we'd end up with these 4 pillars. And in the conversations that have been happening with the community, there was a call, a real need to separate out safety and connection. And so, where other districts might put safety and connection in with teaching and learning, meaning, right, like the classroom needs to be a safe place where students feel connected, or if to put safety and connection with strong partnerships, right, our community needs to feel safe walking around the campus, that kind of thing, right? it was really important to both the core planning team and the instructional focus team to call that out as its own pillar. And actually not even a pillar, but really as kind of the connective tissue. The core planning team called it a beam, and the instructional focus team called it a foundation. So where we're landing in regards to the metaphor, we're not sure yet, but either way is that this concept of safety and connection being the piece that holds all of this together and is embedded throughout it was specifically called out as a need to be its own thing. So I just wanted to name that. You can see it here at the bottom. We're not sure if it'll be at the bottom as a foundation or top as a beam. We're still working on it, so any comments on that might be appreciated. But I wanted to call that out as a point of process. So safety and connection is really the ground that brings them all together. And so with that, that's really, this is our work to date. This is what the great work that the community has been able to produce so far. And as we shared back on the first kind of page, these pieces are, you know, they're not done, right? So when you see 3 and that it's green, it's mostly done, right? So it's very much, we're midway through the process. We have kind of these core pieces in place so that we can begin to build the other pieces off of it. But we definitely will be making some changes and hearing the feedback from the community and you all, and et cetera, to influence the process. And so with that, I was just going to close with the calendar of what we have to do, but I want to invite Dr. Enfield if there's any point of process or comments that she wants to make.
No, Dr. Enfield is saying no, so we can go over that and then I'll lead us here on the board side right after.
Great. And so just to close kind of what we have left to do, I'll do a new share. Our teams are, right, so everything in black has been able to, all of those dates and all of those convenings have influenced where we're at today. And then you can see kind of where we're going. We've got some meetings with some students. We've got the core planning team on May 2nd and June 6th. Instructional focus team will be coming back together on May 4th and May 23rd. So again, they'll be doing a lot of work around the instructional piece and the strategies, and really begin to think about the structures that need to be in place to ensure we have what we need at schools, to ensure that we get more kids home at the end of the day. And so with that, that's all I have. Ready for comments or discussion, I believe. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Ms. Wagner. Okay, so here's how we're gonna do this portion, and we know that there are some people out there with some public comment. So first I'd like to ask my colleagues if you have any clarifying questions. So before we enter into discussion and we start sharing the ideas, are there any clarifying questions to what you saw? Because after that, I'm gonna go to public comment to make sure that we hear those community voices as we open it up for discussion on our side. Trustee Mayberry.
Thank you, Madam President. Hi, Rose. Good morning.
Good morning.
Couple questions, clarifying questions. Can you tell us just generally some of the feedback that you've gotten from some of these forums? Is there anything that resonates to you? I just didn't see any input in that respect in the presentation.
Yes. So generally from the community forums, a lot of their feedback was around the portrait. And that the original portrait was really wordy. It was too big. I remember one of the comments was about, like, if I close my eyes, would I remember what I'm looking at? And it's a little bit like, yeah, actually it was a lot, right? So there were originally 7 kind of qualities, and brought it back down to 5, with some of their specific kind of targeted feedback within that. It has been very positive. There are lots of pieces that they really liked. Right? They liked the strong communicator and collaborator. They found that very important. There were some words that, they were like, I don't really like this word. And so again, bringing that feedback back to the teams, and be able to say, this is the feedback from the community, this is the feedback from the instructional focus team.
to be able to consider it, process it, and then integrate it in. But the big one was about the portrait. The goals, they also were very positive, had a very positive reaction. We weren't really able to share the measures until this last community forum. And so it was really just those gold bucket, the titles. And they felt really strongly about the safety piece and also the empowering students. Those were two that I remember having a little bit more voice and discussion in those community forums.
And a follow-up, if I may, too. If you could talk to me like a fourth grader, no pun intended. There's just a lot of work that's been done, and I've been involved with some strategic planning in my career, and so when I think of the plan, I think of a series of goals, and then under the goals are objectives that have measurements very similar to our current plan. So I'm just trying to understand what are the goals here. I mean, they're identified, but I'm just a little confused if they're actually the goals that we're going to be working with in this plan. The earlier attachment that you had, there were 5 goals. Draft CPT. Let's see, it looks like it's on page 6. I mean, are those the fundamental goals, or are those the objectives to achieve one of the goals? Does that make any sense to you?
Yes. So if I hear you, it's kind of wanting clarity on what are the goals? What are we hoping to be true for kids?
Right.
And to kind of summarize, we want a strong start for kids. That's goal number 1. Right? We want to make sure that they're ready for whatever is next. That's goal number 5. Right? So goal number 1 is about the strong start. What are we doing to ensure that they have a strong start in our school system? And we have a goal for that. And then at the end, how are we empowering them for their future? How are we helping them transition and be prepared for whatever happens after high school? That's goal number 5. And then in between are the other things. So goal number 4 is really about academic achievement and making sure that they will achieve the things that we want them to achieve academically. Right? So they said this as every learner will achieve at least 1 year's growth annually. So every year, student is growing at least 1 grade level in our classes. And then goal number 3, empowered, safe, and supported. So making sure that they feel like they're growing and thriving within the school. And so what are the ways that we're making sure to do that? And then student voice and advocacy. How do we make sure that they have a voice and that they feel that they're advocating for themselves? And as this one says, what are the opportunities that they have to be able to do that within the schools?
Trustee Mayberry, can I offer an amendment to Rose's answer? Or an addition, not an amendment. So
Please.
our ultimate goal is that every student graduates prepared for post-secondary success. That's why we exist. We exist to graduate, highly, skilled, critically thinking citizens that are prepared for the future that they choose. So in essence, goal 5 is really what we're about as a system. We want to empower kids for a future that they've chosen for themselves and that they're prepared for. The other goals along the way, though, are important because we're not going to get to number 5 unless we invest heavily in early learning, right? We know right now that's a gap for us, a big gap for us. We also know that unless students have a sense of ownership and self-efficacy in their own learning, they aren't going to get on that path to a future that they choose. So that's why the student voice and advocacy goal is there, because we feel that that helps them to be advocates for themselves and for the future. We also know more than ever, and I appreciate that the committee's really called out safety and connection. We know that more than ever before, we need to make sure that our students feel connected to their school community. We've got a lot of disconnection right now. And if students feel disconnected, they don't show up. If they don't show up, we can't get them across that stage. And in order to know that they are prepared for that future they choose, measuring their academic growth along the way lets us know that they are going to be prepared across the way. So in essence, I really see it as number 5 is the ultimate goal, but we've got to set those other goals in place to achieve number 5. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess for me, I'm a bottom line guy, and so page 5 is the meat and potatoes. These are the goals that at least we're beginning to sort of formalize, crystallize as we draft this strategic plan going forward, right? But everything you said, Superintendent Field, yeah, spot on. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Rose.
Of course.
I will also add that the way that this is structured is also the way that goals are often viewed in corporations now too, with the way that it's moving. So you've got these larger goals and then you have these measures within it, as opposed to the goals being, let's say, from a corporate perspective, we're gonna raise sales by 10%. Really, the goal now would be to increase like customer satisfaction and engagement and expand our success, and then one of the measures would be raising sales by. So it has to do with the way that that you view the goals and the measures themselves. So this is very in keeping with the way that goals and measures are also viewed in other areas too. But that's a very, very good question, because it's very different than the previous strategic plan that we had. It's a mind shift for sure, particularly since we've been hearing presentations for the past years, tying it back to all of those things. So it's a very different way of
Well,
looking at
and
it.
that's sort of the emphasis for my question. I mean, it is a complete departure from what we've had. And I appreciate where Trustee Nicolette's coming from, you know, the parental involvement. I mean, that's part of the pillar. I don't see in the goal. I'm sure it's there somewhere, but I do have to remind myself, this is draft. We're still working through this. We have a lot more work to do. So.
Well, and we'll have that conversation for sure. Trustee Westlake, I see your light on. And then after we get done with the clarifying questions, we'll go to our public comment, because I know we've got some people here that want.
Thank you, President Smith. And I just want to add my voice to what Trustee Nicolette said. I don't think without us getting parents more involved and more active in the school experience, we're not going to be able to meet these goals as successfully as we would hope. And I'm just coming off of my experience as a new trustee visiting schools. The schools that are showing a lower absenteeism and have been hitting their markers, they have really gotten the parents involved and active in the school experience. They're meeting with parents, maybe not on a weekly basis, but a monthly basis. They're having activities where the parents are involved, game night. I think that really has to be included in the goals, that we empower and motivate and activate parents. That is going to kind of kickstart the kids down this path. So I wanted to add that. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Trustee Westlake. On that note, we'll go ahead and we'll take public comment. This is an item for action, and then we'll bring it back to the board and we'll start talking about how we're going to provide specific direction for the changes we'd like to see. JJ?
I have no cards on this item.
I think that may be because there is a misunderstanding about the cards. I know that you're here to speak. Come on up, and then we'll have you complete the card after.
Oh, missing.
That's okay. Don't feel bad. If you don't know the process, then it's not entirely obvious. So don't worry. We'll have you fill one out after.
Thank you. Dana Hart, educator and WCSD parent. Thank you for having me. As the board and district leadership move forward in setting up systems and structures that meet the needs of our students, I encourage you to follow the research and support the expansion of dual language education in WCSD. All learners deserve the opportunity to leave the public school system with the skills and benefits that come from obtaining the seal of biliteracy, and to create the future that they choose as bilingual, biliterate, and socioculturally competent members of our community. Dual language education, where students learn grade level academic content in 2 languages from the onset of their school experience, at least 50% of this school day in the non-English language, has been proven to be the only means by which our English language learners can close that gap between themselves and their native English-speaking peers. Not only that, but researchers Lindholm Leary, Genesee et al., and Thomas and Collier have found that for students classified as ELs, Those who achieved full oral and literate proficiency in both languages had higher achievement scores, GPAs, and educational expectations than their monolingual English-speaking peers. Slavin and Chung found that in no case did positive results from an English-only literacy program exceed those from a bilingual program. Just look at our performance data and you'll see why our ELs are currently not making the grade. Only a very small percentage of them have the opportunity to attend one of our 2 existing dual language programs. This is a matter of equity. This is not just for our ELs though. Thomas and Collier found that all groups of dual language students score higher on state and national tests than students who are attending any other type of program. This includes Latinx, Asian Americans, African Americans, Native English speakers, students who are economically disadvantaged, and students with special needs, special education needs of all categories of exceptionality. And why? Because in well-implemented dual language programs, education begins with listening and speaking, the foundation of reading and writing. Literacy is taught through the meaningful context of content areas like science, social studies, and math. Students are learning standards-based instruction that's grounded in language literacy and content every step of the way. They develop the ability to classify and develop analytic reasoning. They have enhanced visual spatial benefits. They have the increased ability to focus and develop executive functioning skills. They develop deeper critical thinking and problem-solving skills than monolingual speakers. They show strong creativity skills. And families feel welcome and respected when their language and culture are reflected in the school environment, so they are more involved. Graduation rates increase. A colleague in the core planning team made a comment. That's how I feel about music education. There's so much research to support the positive benefits. Yes, I said, and every child in WCSD has the opportunity to attend music class in every elementary school with the option to continue music at every middle and high school. We need that same advantage given to all of our students.
Ms. Hart. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thank you for being with us.
Leslie Herman.
Hi, Ms. Herman. Welcome.
You got my vote when you ran, so congratulations on that. Good morning, Dr. Enfield and the trustees of the school board. My name is Leslie Herman, and I am here today on behalf of the Incline Schools. I have a long-standing relationship with the Washoe County School District, which has been characterized by sustained mutual respect. I taught at Incline Middle School from 1983 to 1990, Billinghurst from 90 to 94, Galena 95 to 2000, McQueen from 2000 to 2013 as a teacher, department leader, and administrator. My last 4 years of service were in the Incline Schools. I served as the K-12 principal of all 3 schools for 2 years, and my final years of service were just principal of Incline High School. My last year earned our school district the only gold medal from the U.S. News and World Report in the state of Nevada for a comprehensive high school. There were 3 high schools in the entire state. The other 2 were STEM charter schools. So I left behind a legacy I'm really proud of, and I'm here to talk to you today about my desire to help you understand the optics. And I want you to know that I am completely on your team. I am a vetted Washoe County School District person, and I'm really proud of my career. I want to help you understand the optics of reducing those involved in a really important decision that will forever impact the community of Incline Village. Reducing the zoning committee from 1 parent from Incline Middle School, 1 teacher from Incline Middle School, the principal from the school, to a streamlined zoning committee. At the debacle of a meeting that took place last Wednesday at Incline High School, Mr. Searcy was unable to provide a satisfactory answer to the nearly 700 people in the room about if anybody from Incline had been involved in the proposal to close Incline Middle School, stating that there was 1 person that he knew of from Incline on the committee, but she had scheduling conflicts. That 1 person on the committee was our very own Ivy Botmal, a senior at Incline High School. There were no parents, no teachers, no students, no community members or administrators involved in the discussion. Carrie Michael, the principal of Incline Middle School, had no idea that her school was potentially being closed. This is reprehensible, and it's embarrassing for the school district. I cannot quote your current DEI policy, diversity, engagement, and inclusion, but I am fairly certain that this move on your part would not meet any kind of smell test around the concept of inclusion. It absolutely looks to the community, and I know you don't intend this, but it looks to the community that the closure of the school is a foregone conclusion, a done deal, with absolutely no one from the community having had any voice whatsoever. And I get from your board today that you strongly, strongly support parent voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Thank you for being with us.
That's all I have.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're gonna bring this back here. So, unlike a lot of the other committee meetings that have happened in the community and with the staff, we do ours together as a body. That makes this a bit unique. So, Dr. Enfield's gonna share a few thoughts. Our role here is the work that has been presented to us is after feedback from a lot of people, a lot of meetings, a lot of committees. We want to honor those voices that have been brought to us, and this is also an opportunity to suggest refinements, but the plan is not yet done. So, for example, as we explore, and I'll use parental involvement, or where parents, we may make motions around increasing the representation of parents in this. It's not so much about making micro level changes right now as it is adding together as a body, because we'll make these motions individually and then we'll have one at the end, which is the one we have here, where we'll request that they go and they add emphasis or they include something, and then that gets put back into the machine with all the rest of the meetings, and then when we see it again, that will be represented. So the fact that we're making the motion says that there would be an emphasis on balloon releases on the first day of school. So we'll see that represented, but we're not making micro level decisions because the plan is still in place. So it's like we're adding this layer of voice and influence in the process now. And we are also not doing it individually, although we can talk and that feedback is absolutely being taken. It's only as a body where we make individual motions. So if we agree as a body that we want to see an emphasis on a certain topic, and then that is taken as the word, the official motion that comes from the board. But please know that all the feedback and the questions that we're asking are being noted by Performance Fact and the superintendent and her team. So there's a couple interesting layers here with this, because thanks to Nevada's open meeting law, we do these things out in public in this way. So I wanted to explain that, and it's a unique process. So if this feels a little unusual, it's because it is. And we don't do strategic plans very often, and a board has never been this involved with the creation of one, so it's also unique for us as well too. So on that note, I will welcome Dr. Enfield to weigh in.
Thank you, President Smith. And I do want to acknowledge, I want to thank the trustees and acknowledge what Trustee Mayberry and President Smith pointed out, that this is a very different process from what the trustees and our staff and community are used to. It's a very inclusive process, a very open process, with the goal being that we come up with a strong, bold strategic plan that becomes our roadmap for the future. I do just want to offer one thing before I listen to your comments. I couldn't agree more with Vice President Nicolette's affirming the need for us to make sure that families feature prominently in everything we do, not just this plan. And I know that all the trustees show this. Trustee Westlake said that as well. In one of the things the pandemic, I think, revealed is that we had to move well beyond, and I know Delisa is here in the back, so this will likely be music to her ears, but we really had to move away from parent engagement, family engagement. That wasn't enough. And we really even had to move beyond family and parent partnership, to your point. We really need to talk about teaming. How are we teaming with our families in service of our children? So I just would offer this as you have your conversation. The end goal is not teaming with our families. The end goal is the success of our children. We won't achieve that goal without our families. So how do we make sure that within the strategies are that family, but the goal in and of itself, we could
we could be teaming with families and still not get kids across the finish line. We could have all kinds of check boxes that we did and still not achieve the goal. So I just offer, how do we find a way to feature families prominently, understanding that the ultimate goal is the success of our children? And it also has me wondering if there needs to be, if the trustees want to consider some kind of, for lack of a better term, a preamble or very clear value statement that heads up this plan before anything else in the plan. Here is what we believe as a school system, specifically with respect to families, that we are all on one team in service of our children. I just offer that. I think there are lots of ways that we can make sure that families are featuring prominently in this, in achieving the goals. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm gonna, her light's not on, but I'm gonna turn this over to Vice President Nicolette, because Dr. Nicolette, I'd really like you to guide us in this conversation, because again, if a motion is made, it would be around adding emphasis and stating our values around the involvement of families, and then the team involved with making the plan would make that happen. Now, because we're making a motion, it would happen. It's just the way that it might look. But I very much want to hear what you think about that. Is that, and both of you, so let's have a dialogue here about where this could be in the plan. What do you think about what Dr. Enfield said? Because I really, really I like where you're going with this, and so let's talk about where this could fit in a way where we're very, very clear about the goal of teaming with the families, but then also recognizing that at the end of the day, we're responsible for developing children who become the adults and leaders in our community. So I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. So I go back to the 4 pillars. Teaching and learning, schools can't do it alone, investing in people and bringing, excuse me, it all together. And I concentrate on the schools can't do it alone and shouldn't do it alone. I mean, absolutely should not. And then I heard what President Smith said about, you know, that, excuse me, I'm so sorry, that fine line between how do you involve, engage in active participation, parents and families, without giving the sense that you now get to decide about curriculum and grade assignments and just everything that surrounds what we do in our schools for our students. You might regret asking me to speak. Sorry. I like the idea of the preamble, and I'd like to hear from my colleagues at the dais here. I also wonder, and Rosa, I'm looking at you because this has been just deep dive work that, you know, it strains the brain and touches the heart. I'm wondering if there couldn't be, okay, I'm saying it with a smile, I'm wondering if there couldn't be 5 pillars. And that pillar is dedicated to the strength of our parents, families, and our staff. Because Superintendent Enfield, I heard you loud. Those components are monumental. We can't do any of this successfully without those components. So let's talk about that.
I see we're going to go to Trustee Woodley and then Westlake, but really quick, let's go with this. Let's stay with this. So in this potential idea, Pillar B could focus more so on the partnerships we have with the community. And then there would be an additional pillar that would focus more so on this. Is that kind of what you're thinking if you're looking at it's 6 of 6 on the attachment B? Is that kind of what you're thinking? And if you don't mind, I see all of your lights on. I'm going to get with you in just a second. I just want to roll with
it is
where we're
slide
at.
19. It looks like this. Sometimes the visual is very helpful. Okay.
That's an attachment A, just so everyone knows.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. Yes. Yes. So I do see a 5th pillar, and that would be that those people that, you know, I hate this word, but I'm going to use it because it sounds cold. Those real stakeholders, those strong stakeholders who we must listen to and we must engage with. We must work together. And so, yes, a fifth pillar that would, and I'm not good at naming things. I like all these names. Teaching and learning, schools can't do it alone, investing in people and bringing it all together. So yes to your question, that's my thought.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Woodley.
Thank you, Madam President. So, in regards to we have our measures and we have our pillars, and I'm referring to the pillars in the first presentation. I think it's 1 through 4, pillar A, B, C, and D. So, when I look at the measures, I do appreciate that number 1 is strong start for early success, because I do believe in that. We have to start strong, and I do believe that parental guidance, that parental input is very, very important in this initial, in this initial portion of our goals. I'd like to see the pillars identified prior to the goals. Typically, that's how you would see it. I think that would have helped us with understanding that parental involvement would be prominent. I like the idea of the preamble, because that's the whole idea from my perspective, is when we all read something, what comes up first is what appears, whether rightfully or not, appears to be the most important. So I do like that preamble. I also like to see a correlation with these goals, with the pillars, specifically with regards to the strong start for early success, to have a strong reference to the involvement of parents. Thank you.
Very good idea. So just as we're keeping track, we're going to come back to these. It feels like we're liking some of the ideas about adding the preamble, and also there's a great idea to specifically focus a fifth pillar around that. So I'm liking this. Trustee Westlake.
Thank you, President Smith. The district has taken on the responsibility of teaching the whole child social emotional learning, and we can't say we're taking on that responsibility if we don't dive in the whole way, not just dip our toe in. And the social emotional learning of a child, it starts with the family, it starts with parents. So I can't state strongly enough, if we are going to accept that objective, then we have to do it with including parents, and also in the process, we're educating the parents. We're teaching them along the way that their input is important, and we're empowering them, and we're basically saying, hey, we absolutely have to have you involved with this if we are going to teach the whole child, because that includes the family. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Trustee Westlake. I'd like to add to this, and it was one of the things that Rose specifically asked us. It was brief, but I noticed this when I was reviewing the materials too. So in attachment B, the very, very last page are those pillars A through D, and then it has the safety and connection down at the bottom. So again, attachment B, and it's page 6 of 6. I very much think, so I understand that it's foundational. I would like to see this represented as a beam. It has been made abundantly clear to us over the past few years that when you do not have safety and connection, there is no way to elevate our educators. There is no way to have consistent standard aligned curriculum and instruction if there is no safety in the building. And so I like the way it's worded. I don't have recommendations, but I will likely suggest and make a motion to that fact when we get to that this be a beam, because you have to achieve that before you even get to any of your pillars. So that's, and I'm keeping notes, so we're going to come back to all of this, okay? But I just wanted to put that out to my colleagues that is a lesson we have learned loud and clear. Trustee Church.
Thank you. I don't know where to start. I've been very silent during this process. First of all, because I really do defer to Dr. Nicolette with her PhD background, work in education, and we had talked offline previously. My background as a military officer is kind of a get or done type thing, so I've just been listening. And I'm not really totally qualified to weigh in on the real specifics of how we educate the kids, but here I go. So first of all, I'll address the two public speakers. ELA is extremely important, especially with our 42% Hispanic population, which doesn't mean that they all are or are not proficient in dual languages or English, but that is extremely important. And if I may say it another way, esto es muy importante para mí porque yo hablo español también. But even though I speak Spanish, I'm not an expert on how you learn Spanish. It just kind of happened to me. So, number two, the Incline Village Middle School speaker. This is probably not something for the strategic plan, but I just want you to know this is at the top of my agenda. It's extremely important. I met with the superintendent today to discuss it. So I'm not going to dive into that too much, but it is extremely important. With regards to the strategic plan, I was here for the last one. I read into the record one of the paragraphs, I remember, 50-cent words that, with my college degree, I could not understand. So I'm glad we're not doing that this time. I do agree with Dr. Nicolette on the parental involvement issue. And again, I agree with Trustee Woodley, what a great idea to have some kind of an intro, preamble, et cetera, et cetera. The 4 pillars, extremely important to me. Schools can't do it alone. Anybody that knows me knows that probably my number one priority internally is at-risk kids, at-promise kids, and while we still have to deal with the kids that are on track, the ones that are off track are probably my priority. Those are the ones I care deeply about. And so I don't know if that's part of the strategic plan, but how do we involve everybody in the community when a kid is off track? Social services, the criminal justice system. That's just, I just can't emphasize enough how I think that's the biggest part of that pillar. And again, I don't know where it belongs in the strategic plan, but on the attachment A at the very, very bottom, and I'd like our speaker to weigh in on this, it refers to, let me try to find it exactly, in red letters, all these only if the strategic plan is implemented with discipline. So I'd really like feedback on what that means, but I really believe we've gone a little bit off track on enforcing discipline in the classroom. I don't know if it belongs in the strategic plan, but violence in the schools has become a serious issue, and I think we absolutely have to deal with that. And again, I'm not an expert on how we do strategic plans, so I don't know if it belongs in there or not, but I want to put that.
Trustee Church, so I like where you're going with this. The reason why I'm jumping in is, so then do you like the idea of taking that safety and connection and having it as a beam? You can't get to anything below unless you have this, because I'm riffing off of what you're saying, like with discipline, safety. So then do you like the idea of taking that and having that as the leading beam? Like I was just saying, do you feel that that represents that? Because you don't have anything else unless you have those things, and that would be part of the focus.
Probably. I mean, I'm just not an expert on the strategic plan, and how do I phrase this? It's such a 30,000-foot thing that the importance is how we implement it, regardless of how we do all these fancy words and pillars and whether we have 5 or 6. Just to me is the get her done. The military officer in me, the cop in me says, get her done. So I kind of agree, but I really don't have a total opinion on that. That said, to me, number one issue is quality of education. That's probably the number one pillar. We got to educate the kids. Within that, the at-risk kids. And I just think we need to get back, and I do think we've gone a little bit off track, to the 3 R's, commonly called the 3 R's. But that more involves critical thinking now than when I went to school. I used to ride my horse to school. The 3 R's, we don't have to memorize the capital of North Dakota or the capital of Nevada, which somebody had said was Las Vegas. No, it's not. So we don't have to memorize that. You didn't know that. We don't have to memorize like we did, but we do have to emphasize education versus some of the other stuff that I think we've gone off track. So I think I covered everything, but again, violence, discipline, quality of education, strongly agree with Trustee Woodley as well as Trustee Nicolette. And again, the speakers, I'm listening. I'm not sure where that falls in on the strategic plan. So that's my 50 cents.
Thank you. So Dr. Enfield is like feverishly writing notes. And and I appreciate that because I can tell you by the fact that I get to read her notes, that she is firing on all cylinders and taking in this feedback. So I think she wants to weigh in on helping us formulate our direction. And we'll start with the preamble, okay? Because she's got some ideas around this.
So I have to say, first of all, to Vice President Nicolette, thank you, because you have pushed me to the next level in my learning and leadership, and I'm going to explain why. So in my prior district, I think you all know that rather than a mission or vision, we developed our Highline Promise to know every student by name, strength, and need, so they graduate prepared for the future they choose, right? And that became the DNA of our system. Other districts have used it. I have yet to come up with something better. I can tell you that Speaker Yeager, when we presented, put out on social media that the Washoe Schools Promise, because it's now our promise because it can be, is a beautiful summation of a strong public education system. I think there's something there. Here's where I missed the boat though in coming up with that, and here's why we're going to take it to the next level. The critical importance of families in delivering on that promise needs to be stated loudly, boldly, and clearly. So in my mind, what I would offer for discussion and thought is we lead with that promise. We're going to know every child, and it gets to connection and it gets to safety, right? We're going to lead with that promise to know every student in the Washoe County School District by name, strength, and need, so they graduate prepared for the future of their choice. We will only deliver on that promise, however, if, and now let's fill in the blanks when it comes to families. If, when, what have you. I see a direct connection between, call it a preamble, call it what you will, but we lead with that promise and then we name, we're not going to be able to deliver on it unless we have, that we are intentionally and respectfully teaming with and listening to our families in the education of their children. Does that make sense, Vice President Nicolette?
It absolutely does, and when Trustee Woodley mentioned the strategy of doing it that way, I was on board. And so thank you for taking it a step further. And I'm happy to help.
Michelle's listening because she's now going to have to figure out some words based on what you give us. We're going to make it pretty, meaningful, but pretty.
Well, if I may, we're still going to talk about the fifth pillar. So the promise can be what the promise is. I believe what I'm hearing from my colleagues is that as it relates to the strategic plan, we would add direct, prominent messaging based on the ideas that the superintendent has just shared. And so we don't have to write that right now. The motion that someone will make will be that we will add to the strategic plan based on the ideas that the superintendent will explore around this being an addendum to the promise. So we don't want to call it a preamble because that's technically something that goes first. But so the motion I would look for right now is that we add to the strategic plan on how we would deliver that promise with an additional message based on what superintendent shared. So that could be a first motion. If anyone is interested in making it.
Can you repeat that one more time, please?
Sure. And you know, because by the way, one of you is going to say yes or so moved or do this. So the motion is that the Board of Trustees directs the superintendent to develop additional messaging in the strategic plan based on how we will deliver the promise for the school district with the emphasis on families.
So moved.
So moved, okay. And then is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Trustee Woodley. I see two lights on, so let's have a discussion on the motion.
Thank you. Yeah, I tried to interrupt, but this could be done under discussion. I did put forward the fact that that last attachment A talks about implemented with discipline, so I would ask Rose maybe if she could weigh in on her interpretation of what that means.
So I think we're using discipline in a little bit different. I think it means that we are disciplined in the implementation of the plan, Trustee Church. I don't think it's talking about discipline as with respect to disciplining behavior.
And I think that's exactly what Dr. Nicolette told me offline too, but Rose, is that correct?
That's correct. It has to do with how, like, our intentionality, how we are organized in order to implement the plan.
Got it. And then a final comment, the Air Force motto, very similar to probably the Marine Corps motto, tell them what you're going to tell them what you told them. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
And tell them again. All right, very good. So we have a motion, we have a second by Trustee Woodley. So all those in favor of that addition to the strategic plan, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, very good. Now let's move on to the idea about restructuring the pillars. So again, in keeping with this, we're not going to be very prescriptive in that we're going to write it out, but we're going to talk about developing a fifth pillar that focuses on the involvement and importance of families. And then we can leave it up to the teams to decide, where does community fit? Where do other things fit? And then let them sort out really how that all fits, knowing that many meetings are still to come after this. So let's have that conversation and see if we arrive at a motion with that. Because I think that's a great idea.
I do too, and I'm looking at Rose, and they've worked so hard to synthesize, but I do see 6 pillars. I see that family. I know, I'm putting myself out there. There's 4 right now.
Now you want 6?
Well, that's
Well, so
here's why I say that.
really
I
quick, can
want
we make sure we're looking at attachment
Yes,
B and
yes.
6? Okay, good, because I know there's the other slide that also says pillars, and that's a little bit confusing between attachment A and attachment B.
Got you.
And so just for anyone
Got
that's
you.
following along, we're talking about 6 of 6 on attachment B. I
Thank
apologize,
you.
thank you.
You're right, they are different. One has more words, one has less words. President Smith, I really like your safety and connection. I believe that has to be a pillar, a preamble. I'm not sure. The experts can decide that, an umbrella. That is truly, and thank you for bringing that up. My Safe and Healthy Schools Commission self is a little embarrassed that I didn't say it first, so thank you.
Well, we can make a motion to that. I see a light on. I don't know who wants, I can make the motion too. The president sometimes does do that. But I'm more than happy, so I'll just do that. I move that the safety and connection layer be elevated to a primary beam of the pillars and the building blocks.
I'll second that.
All right, so first by President Smith, seconded by Trustee Mayberry. Any discussion about moving that up to the top in terms of priorities across the top? No? All right, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. All right, motion carries, and so that is going to be 5-0 with the note that Trustee Church had stepped away. All right, so let's talk about it. So what I like about this is that safety and connection is like a building block, and then we've got the pillars, because we recognize we can't get to these pillars unless we have the top layer. So let's talk about having an E. So we've got A, B, C, D, and E, and we recognize that pillar B may also change if we add an E. So let's talk about adding a pillar that focuses on the importance of families. Is that kind of where we're going with this? Because I would certainly be open to that. I don't think that we should add any more than one. So, because remember, safety and connection is different. It's like a layer that you have to get through in order to get to the pillars. But we could certainly direct that they develop a pillar that specifically calls out. Or we could ask that pillar B be restructured to add additional emphasis on, and then that means we don't have to add another pillar, because we've added the statement, we've elevated the safety and connection. We could provide direction to provide a stronger emphasis on the importance of families within Pillar B. So all of these are good options. And I see Trustee Westlake, your light was on first.
And thank you, President Smith. Maybe if we could say something to the fact that we're going to make a conscious effort to encourage, empower the contributing factors to every learner, which is family, admin, teachers. Sometimes people don't feel that encouragement, they don't feel that empowerment, they don't feel that nurturing. But if it's stated and then we really actively work towards that, so our admin, our parents, our teachers understand how important that is in the contribution to basically, we're growing this little person into this adult that's going to go out into the community, and all of these factors have such an important part. But we as a district have to really be cognizant that we have to always make sure that we're doing that encouragement.
Absolutely. And so here's the good news, is that in addition to the motions that we'll be making, and I heard some excited chattering over here, so I'm going to see what's emerging from that. But the other part is that in having this conversation, without being told this, I'm 100% for sure that performance fact has been paying very close attention. Our superintendent has been paying very close attention. And in the remainder of the plan still to be built, I am willing to bet that we are going to see a strong thread of this in line with what it is that you just shared, okay? And so on that note, I heard some exciting chatter over here to my right. Are there ideas that have emerged?
Yeah, thank you. I think from my perspective, our perspective, the Pillar B, I think, does a pretty good job of sort of accentuating the ownership. We had some language earlier in the preamble of whatever that's going to look like. So I think we should just sort of beef up Pillar B, better highlight the engagement that we desire from our families. But I'll leave the wording to the team.
So what I'm hearing for a motion is that the Board of Trustees would direct Dr. Enfield to work with the team to have a stronger emphasis on families and engagement within Pillar B in the next iteration.
Yeah, I can make that motion as you just said, since you read my mind.
Trustee Nicolette, I second.
Very good. All right, so motion by Trustee Mayberry, seconded by Vice President Nicolette. And now we'll have discussion on the motion. So Trustee Church, while you had stepped away, I want to get you up to speed. The thought is now that we have the additional statement, which we've casually called the preamble, we've elevated up the safety and the connection. So rather than adding an additional pillar, we feel that we can work within that pillar and add additional emphasis around families, their ownership, their involvement. And so we're going to further develop that pillar as opposed to adding a separate one. So that's the motion as it stands right now.
And yeah, again, I was absent, but I think I heard enough that I can vote responsibly on that.
Very good. I see your light on, Trustee Mayberry.
I just wanted to at least speak for myself on that. You know, we've heard a lot of discussion about family, parent involvement, and I just don't want the public to suggest that somehow we, or that this district doesn't include parents and families, because we do. And you can't force every mom and dad to be involved either, and I think that's something we forget. I'm a parent. I have 2 children in this district. I feel involved. I'm well informed. But I'm also an engaged parent, right? So I just wanted to ensure that was on the record, because I know there's a lot of narratives out there that would suggest otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for that motion to you and Vice President Nicolette. All right, so we'll take it to a vote now. So all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. All right, motion passes 6-0. So now, one bit of housekeeping that we still need is, so those are all individual things. Now we're gonna need a motion, as you see on your agendas, because just like when we make changes along the way, we need a overarching motion that packages this all up and then sends all this discussion back with the individual items that we had. So you don't have to worry about getting fancy. The recommendation that you see here is exactly the motion that I would need from a colleague.
Trustee Nicolette here. I move that the Board of Trustees provides input to the Superintendent and Performance Fact, Inc. regarding the district-wide strategic planning process, with the strategic plan coming back to the board for final approval June 2023.
A second.
All right, motion by Vice President Nicolette, seconded by Trustee Woodley. Trustee Westlake, do you have? No, that's okay. Dr. Enfield.
Thank you, President Smith. First, Rose, I want to thank you very, very much for walking us through this and for your partnership in this process. And again, I want to thank our team and our staff community members who are part of this. I also just have to say, I'm so happy I almost want to cry because this conversation was so important and it pushed me in how to be a better learner and leader within this process. And I want the trustees and the public to know that this isn't just going to be a document that's going to sit on a shelf. This is going to be, this is going to become really, as I said, the DNA of our system, reflecting our values, our priorities, what we want for our children, not just what we want, what we as a community, families, community members, staff, trustees. This is going to be something that galvanizes us all in such a positive direction. It will be hard work, but nothing worth doing is ever easy. And so I just want to thank the trustees for your commitment to what I know has been a very new process, but I promise you that it is going to be, it's just going to be a huge leap forward for our system and for our kids. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. All right, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. All right, the motion passes 6-0. This was a fantastic conversation. I know. That is, we're feeling good. I think we can. Wonderful. Okay, so I am going to have us take a brief pause. We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we're going to welcome Mark Mathers and Jeff Bozzo for item 2.02. But for right now, we're going to take a pause, and I will hit the gavel again at 11 a.m. sharp. Thank you.
JJ.
All right, everyone. It is 11:02, and we're going to call this meeting again to order. We're going to be moving on to item 2.02. This is the presentation by staff and discussion by the Board of Trustees regarding the district's fiscal year 2023 to 24 tentative budget for all district funds, process and status, possible action to direct the superintendent to analyze and report back to the board specific budget issues, items, or other changes to the district's fiscal year 2023-24 budget process, and possible action to provide approval of the fiscal year 2023 to 24 tentative budget. This is an item for possible action. And we're going to welcome our Chief Financial Officer, Mark Mathers, and then also our Budget Director, Jeff Bozzo. Before we get started, just as a level set for everyone here, we're going to talk through the most introductory levels of the budget because we still don't entirely know how much money we're getting from the state. Also, when we eventually go through the analyses that we've asked for, although we could certainly vote to remove one, the Tetris pieces are still not falling into place. So these analyses will still continue to roll forward, and then as we have a more firmer view is when we will actually start making actual decisions about what we choose. We can't quite, I mean, don't get me wrong, I shouldn't say that. We could technically vote to for sure do something now, Or we may decide to just continue on in these discussions when we have a better idea of the amount of money that we're working with, and then we can make more firm decisions later. So that's a long way of saying we're not deciding on the merits of these analyses quite yet. We may ask for them to be refined. We may give some feedback to them, but we're not weighing in yay or nay quite at this point. They're going to roll forward as we have a better idea of exactly what we're working with. Now, with that said, we still do need the motion that you see here later on in the conversation, because we do need to give direction to the staff overall and to advance that tentative budget, because we do have that requirement with the state. Okay? So does everybody feel pretty clear on that? All right. Thank you so much for giving me that. I just wanted to make sure everybody was on the same page as we go about this conversation so we know how to process what you have and hit it.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you, Madam President. Mark Mathers, Chief Financial Officer. As you explained very nicely, the tentative budget, as I always say, is really truly tentative, especially in legislative years. This is kind of an awkward conversation at this point that we have because there are so many unknowns. You know, we've got a session going on and there could be restrictions on our funding placed by the legislature. There could be all kinds of things that happen between now and the end of the session, which is June 5th. But as the President explained, statutorily, state law requires us to file a tentative budget despite all those unknowns by April 15th. For other governments who control their own destiny more and have their own set of revenues, oftentimes the tentative budget is a near final budget. For us, it's completely different. It really is tentative. So we will go through this morning and into the afternoon with a process where we'll lay out kind of the Tetris pieces that have fallen into place. So we'll provide you updated general fund revenue estimates based on some information we did receive from the Department of Education that differed from what we presented to you in late January. We also, throughout the process, are refining our cost estimates. And so we have some information there that we'll need to update you on. Then, as we explained at the last board meeting, we'll go through what departments submitted for truly, truly critical needs, and we'll explain what that need means more on those slides. It doesn't mean that there aren't more critical needs than what you see, but these were the absolute items that from a health, safety, and welfare standpoint we believe need to be funded. And then, as the President explained, we'll go through the 4 areas you asked us to examine. So the business office has worked with affected departments and schools to kind of lay out the issues for you in 4 areas. And we're looking for, again, your feedback, certainly any direction you have, but not necessarily any final decisions, because, again, we don't know what our resources are and won't until later in May and early June. So the packet you have in front of you is voluminous. I know you see that. In addition to this presentation, Attachment B provides the actual budget forms that we will be submitting to the Department of Taxation with any changes you direct this morning, or this afternoon, I should say. Attachment C is a breakout of general fund and special revenue fund budgets by department, and then attachments D through G are those 4 fiscal areas of analysis you asked us to do. So there's memos for each of those areas. Hopefully you've had a chance to at least scan them at this point, and then we will cover them later today. So with that preamble, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff to start talking about, again, some refinements to revenue and cost estimates we had provided earlier.
Thanks, Mark. So when we presented to you last time on February 28th, we presented a preliminary surplus of $76 million. We have had some changes since then, so we'll go through those now. So at the regular board meeting on February 28th, the board approved that 2 associate chiefs and a special assistant to the superintendent those positions were approved, so we added those to the FY24 budget. We've also seen further increased utility costs, which I'll get to in a little more detail on the next slide, of $2.9 million. We're also expecting to see a health insurance rate increase. We're still working with our health insurance consultant who will be presenting to our insurance committee options for rate changes probably later this month and in May. For right now, we have a 5% placeholder, and that's after 3 years of not having any rate increases. Departments also identified some savings, rebasing some budgets during our department meeting process. And then we also had, what we'll get into in a few more slides, are the department critical needs request of about $1.2 million. The total cost increases from the previous estimate are about $6.9 million. We then received some, the People-Centered Funding Plan workbook from the Nevada Department of Education. There were some minor adjustments in there, and what that led to was a $17 decrease in our per pupil number, which reduces our revenue by about $1 million. And then there was another $100,000 adjustment there. The total revenue adjustments are a decrease of $1.1 million. So the total change reduces our projected surplus from $76 million to $68 million. So diving just a little bit deeper on the utility costs, as you've probably seen on your home utility bill, our electricity and natural gas prices have been going up. Our energy and sustainability manager worked with our utility provider to get these projected rate increases for the next year, and you can see electricity over the next calendar year is supposed to increase around 41% and then 53% for natural gas. Our district usage volumes for these two utilities have remained relatively stable, so it's not large swings in usage that are causing these costs to increase. And then as you can see in this table here at the bottom, from our fiscal year 22 total cost to what we're projecting for fiscal year 24, the cost for electricity and natural gas have almost doubled. So that's the reason for that additional $2.9 million increase in utilities on the previous slide. So we'll move on next to critical needs requests. So again, when in January we met with departments and had a budget kickoff meeting to go over the budget process with departments, and when we talked about critical needs, these weren't, the district has major needs in a lot of areas, but those are more in line with strategic plan initiatives. So when the strategic plan is being developed and finalized, that would be the more appropriate time to consider these program expansions or new initiatives or new programs. So what we kept department requests to was the most critical needs that would impact current operations or student health, safety, or welfare. So these requests were first ranked by the budget team and then passed on to our executive leadership team. We re-ranked the items into these tier 1s and tier 2s that you see in front of you here. And the executive leadership team's recommendations are what we'll go over here next.
So I do want to jump in and say again, just to emphasize, we know there are so many critical needs in this district from a staffing standpoint. I've worked in a number of agencies, as you, I think, know. I've never worked in an agency that's had lighter staffing in terms of central services functions than Washoe County School District by far. So I know there are, not my office, but there are many offices who are struggling with the increased demands, workloads, growth of the district that have not been addressed over several decades. And they truly are critical needs, but we held off those requests in this process so that we could consider them in conjunction with the strategic plan. I hope you feel like that makes sense to do. We can talk about, if there's a different approach and you want to start seeing what you mean, Mark, when you say that, we can talk about that for the future. But I just want to emphasize that no one should come away looking at these critical needs and thinking, oh, that'll do it. The district just needs $1 million more of positions and then we're all good. No, we're not all good. It's in some cases, I think, pretty dire. But again, we wanted to be judicious with your time and their time and not go further and get ahead of the strategic plan too much. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that a little bit more than what Jeff had indicated.
Can I comment specifically on that? Well said, but that said, we're hearing from constituents that the number one function is education. We've had cuts in teachers, we've frozen positions, and we're seeing declining enrollment. We peaked at about almost 65,000. We're down to about 60,000 projected, 61 currently. So my constituents are saying decreasing enrollment, increasing bureaucracy by whatever term, and that's a terrible term, but you know what I mean, the increasing administrative issues. How do I answer those constituents?
Yeah, it's a good question. I get the problem you have explaining that. I guess I would say, just to take two departments that I feel personally are greatly understaffed, those would be human resources and information technology. And they haven't had increases for a long, long time. And we can bring you benchmark data that compares staffing of our IT department to that of like districts, so that you can see the stark difference between our staffing in our IT department versus other schools. They generally, preliminarily when we've looked at it, they generally have an IT person in each and every school. We don't. And so we have so many new systems that we're embarking on and leading and implementing, and you need staff to manage that and support that and service that. And those are systems that are in the schools. So there's a little bit of, I think, an artificial wall when we talk about central services versus schools. Those IT people are in schools. So when we talk about the IT department, they have to be managed, right, by the IT staff. They can't easily be managed by others, but they're in the schools. So that's what I would say. And then when it comes to human resources, and I know we have an assessment coming, and maybe that'll show we can reconfigure staff to be more efficient. I'm hopeful of that. But we don't have personnel analysts to help departments screen applications like anywhere else. So departments are on their own to screen applications for central services positions. So again, it's just been decades of neglect and underfunding that we are faced with. And at some point, the day of reckoning comes where you're not supporting our schools and our students the way they should be. And so that's how I look at it, that these are agencies that are oftentimes in the schools themselves or directly helping recruit for positions in schools. So if you don't have the people to recruit or support those functions, your schools suffer.
Well, if I might follow up, you gave two great examples of an increase. And I am not going to name a single job because I don't want cards and letters coming in, but are we looking at where the caseload has decreased to have more money for teachers, more money for pay raises? Is there anywhere to look where we might freeze positions?
So I think you missed out on the dark years. And I don't know if any trustees might be remaining from those times when I came on board in 2017 through 2020, when we reduced scores of positions. We faced a deficit of more than $20 million, and there were cuts to both vacant positions and filled positions during that time. More recently, we've reduced our TOSA positions as part of our budget process. So we have reduced central services positions since 2017, and we tried to be surgical about it. We tried to be thoughtful about it. We managed around those reductions and still perform, an adequate level of service. But again, when we talk about the many new systems that we're considering to employ, whether it's Centegix or iReady or other systems, they don't support themselves. They have to have additional staff to support those systems to make them useful. So I guess the answer I would give you is we did reduce central services to a great degree versus the positions at schools. So the direction from the board at the time was stay away from cuts at the schools, focus on central services, which we did for the most part. Again, there were some TOSA positions reduced back in 2017 and 2020, and now more recently in the last year. So that's how I would answer that.
And thank you, Mr. Mathers. I'll also add, not to put Dr. Enfield on the spot, but she's also publicly committed to always making sure that we're doing reviews for efficiencies in all the different areas. We don't know exactly where that's going to lead, but we always want to make sure that we're working efficiently, and there could always be changes with how departments are structured, where they report, the tools that we're using. We don't know if that would actually lead to headcount like adjustments, but she's totally committed to that too. So we need to be efficient with all the money that we have. Trustee Westlake, I see your light on.
Thank you, President Smith. In self-interest to myself, could you, if not now, get me a list of the departments that do need to have positions filled, and also the data of other districts where they sit in comparison to us? Because as a new trustee, I'm trying to wrap my head around it, but it's just so vague. And you're saying a lot of departments. I don't know what departments you're speaking of. So just moving forward, when I'm thinking about these things, I like to have that specific information. And I'm glad President Smith did say that Superintendent Enfield is looking at all the positions and where the pieces can be moved around. But I think what you're talking about needs to also be heard as she's doing that work. We also kind of need to know where you're seeing we're lacking.
Yeah, we can try to put that together, and I apologize for the diversion here of our presentation, but I just thought it was important to talk about, because again, I've been at the state, I've been at Washoe County. There's no other place like this that does as much with as little staff. So thank you.
It's very important.
No, this is definitely not a diversion, because this goes to the heart of why we need these, tier 1 and tier 2 critical needs. And this can also be turned into a report that gets distributed to the trustees, which is a model that we're kind of working towards too. So we can definitely talk to the superintendent about that. All right, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So we'll review these tier 1 requests followed by tier 2. So the first item here is a foster program coordinator. It's been grant funded or partially grant funded and then half-time general funded in the past. The request here is to fully fund it out of the general fund because that grant funding is no longer available. We then have human resources and position control positions. 2 of those positions are in human resources. Those positions are more reserved until the HR assessment is completed and we can figure out how we're going to use those positions moving forward. And then the position in position control, that's in the business office, is critical in the change to benefits on day 1, so we're looking to fund that position for 1 more year. We then have a grant coordinator, similar to the foster program coordinator, is currently halfway funded in the general fund. We're going to continue funding that in the general fund on a permanent basis.
May I weigh in on that real quick, 1 sentence? I think that's extremely important because they pay for themselves. We've missed grants, so we don't want to do that again.
Yeah. Thank you. Next, we have a school police dispatch position. This position is being requested due to increased call volumes and potential or anticipated increased call volumes with the implementation of our new Centegix alert system. We then have a request for school nurse positions. Again, this is due to increased service volumes for increase in students with specific conditions that require more services from our school nursing staff. And then we also have an instructional textbook replacement increase of $100,000. And we'll also look to, if we're able to in FY23, pump in some one-time additional funding for textbook replacement costs as well. Continuing with tier 1 request in our information technology department, we have a position that's 35 hours a week and all the rest are 40 hours a week. These are our one-to-one tech positions that provide direct supports to schools. That first request is just increasing that one position to 5 hours a week so that they're all 40 hours per week. We then have a request to fund the IT property control technician. This was funded out of our indirect costs from the ESSER funds, but with our new device refresh program and how many devices we're getting each year, this position is critical in making sure those are distributed to schools and tracked properly. So the recommendation here is to fund that as an ongoing position out of our E-rate fund. And then the information technology department also had a request to increase their training and travel budget using money from a different expenditure code in their operating budget. Next is the transportation routing software program. This is just to update the program and create efficiencies in the department. The old routing software, I think, is 13 years old, very out of date, and doesn't allow the department to do different kinds of route modeling, which is critical for their function. There's also a facilities management work order system. This would update the current work order system, similar to transportation. It's a very old, outdated system, so this would upgrade it, create efficiencies in our facilities department. And lastly, here we have some cost-neutral requests. Our family school partnerships is requesting 2 positions to, and that funding will be offset by reducing their non-personnel budget. There's a request to add 3 social workers and 3 mental health professionals, again, reducing contracted services budget for social worker services. That's budget neutral, paid for out of our at-risk weighted funding. And then lastly, our internal audit add a minor travel and training request that would be paid for a different expenditure code. Moving on to Tier 2, there's a request for a human resources supervisor position. Again, this is more of a placeholder until we get the results of the HR assessment. Next, there's a request to provide 2 additional bus drivers. This would help students get to our Inspire Academy. These students who are assigned to that school live outside of the regional transportation public transportation system, so this would help them get to those schools. And then lastly, we don't have a facilities use software program in our facilities department, which makes managing the different community organizations that use our facilities makes it difficult to manage. So this would put in place a system so we can replace the paper system in order to move into the 21st century finally. So that wraps up the critical needs. So as you can see here, you've seen this slide before. We had these four buckets of where the funding will go. You can see critical needs is checked off here, and this would leave the remaining $68 million surplus available for these buckets of employee compensation, changes to class sizes or other staffing guidelines, and new programs or program expansions aligned to the strategic plan. That would also include any kind of requirements pushed down by the legislature that we would need to fund too. So I'll pass it back to Mark to go over the general fund summary.
So what we should, again, confirm or clarify to you is that both Tier 1 and Tier 2 requests are funded in this tentative budget. So conceivably, if you didn't agree with that, you know, we could remove Tier 2 or remove Tier 1 for that matter, but they are included in the costs that you see here under expenses. So I know this is a busy chart, but to summarize, we see an increase in state revenue sources net of enrollment decreases of just shy of 81 million there. You see under sources and some minor adjustments to other revenues as well. And then under expenses, you see again an increase of $80 million. Transfers out are reduced for reasons we'll talk about. We're also recommending reducing our contingency account. That was recommended in a prior budget meeting. So to explain here a little bit what we're doing, because of the tentative kind of nature of where we sit and unknowns about ultimately where funding, how much funding we'll receive, we know that we will utilize our funding for some combination of compensation increases and conceivably program or staffing increases, right? But at this time, we don't know kind of what that mix is. So what the tentative budget does is takes that additional funding and basically allocate it to salaries and benefits and doesn't make any of the decisions at this time. So again, we're kind of parking the money for the moment, pending again the May Economic Forum, when they meet, when we'll learn more about our funding, as we watch the legislature go through, the bill draft process, see if there's any bills that carry unfunded mandates for us, and so forth. So that's how, kind of in totality, we've managed around the budget. If we were to not budget expenses like that and show a surplus of a little under 70 million, I think the concern I would have is that's misinterpreted by some folks. And then also we'd likely get some direction from the State Department of Taxation, who reviews our tentative budget and has to give us a letter approving our tentative budget, because we would exceed our allowed maximum fund balance of 16.6%. So for that reasons, we're, again, budgeting it all in salaries and benefits, and whether it's used for compensation or for additional programs will be decided later, but it'll all go, either way, it'll all go in salaries and benefits.
I get a clarification. I thought I knew this, but I guess, so we have a fund balance that we can't go over 16%. Then we have our contingency fund, which is generally 12%?
No, it's much smaller. It's roughly 1%, actually a 0.5% now of our total general fund budget. So state law allows for a contingency account for just unplanned, unforeseen expenses during the year that you might have. It's your, kind of a mini savings account you can draw from during the year, and then there's your fund balance that's more of a long-term savings account.
What's the 12% that I was thinking of?
That's our fund balance target. Yeah. So speaking of fund balance, this chart shows you kind of where we end up. We are assuming a reduction of our fund balance by $5 million. Remember, we had bonuses for WEA members budgeted, and that's a one-time cost. And then we also have carryover funding for encumbrances, purchase orders that carried over the years. So we'll see if we spend all of our budget, we would see a decline from $61.5 million to $56 million in the current fiscal year. And then this again shows a balanced budget. Our fund balance would be maintained at $56 million a year. Unfortunately, that'll mean a decline as a percentage of fund balance, which we kind of show in the next chart. And really, if you look at the top chart, this is just a function of a bigger denominator. So we'd have to throw money into fund balance to maintain our current percentage, which we're not recommending doing at this time, but the board could choose to do that for our final budget.
I'd like to welcome Trustee Mayberry to the conversation.
Yes, thank you, President Smith. Since you're talking about the fund balance, Mr. Mathers, I just wanted to get some clarification. President Smith asked you some questions, which I appreciated, and you responded to her. One of the questions was where we stand with other school districts with ending fund balance. I mean, I'm looking at the chart that you provided. Am I reading this correctly? Our ending fund balance is the lowest of all school districts in the state?
We were the lowest. I think we're second lowest now as a percentage of our expenses. That is correct.
And this current fiscal year, we're aiming for 12%.
That's our fund balance target.
That's the target.
But that was before, of course, this massive funding increase that we've seen proposed for this session. And again, that's going to mean our fund balance drops even if we maintain the same amount of cash, i.e. $56 million.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
And I appreciate that, Trustee Mayberry, because I did. So for those of you who are not familiar, the trustees get the opportunity to ask questions beforehand. We get those answers, and that also becomes part of the public record. I will say that given the incredible needs, like we just talked about, those critical needs, I completely understand why 12% was a target. That feels like a very reasonable amount. I can tell you personally, I don't think that I support taking the funding we'll get from the state to elevate us to that level, because we are in a pretty critical state. That doesn't mean I want us to go too low. So it's Goldilocks. Right. Not too high, not too low, just right. And I don't know what that number is. So, and I would not suggest that we try to define that. But I do just want to state for the record that I wouldn't support taking the state funding to elevate it, even though I respect and agree with the target. I just don't think we're in that place right now. So thank you.
Thank you. This next slide I won't go into. It's just kind of a stoplight kind of chart to again show where we stand in terms of different requirements in our budget that we need to meet. Again, we're shy of that 12% target, but we are right in the middle of the prior fund balance target of 8 to 10%. So with that, I think we're ready to turn to the 4 fiscal analysis areas you asked us about. Again, we have attachments D, E, F, and G that contain memos on each of these subjects. So if you're ready, we're ready to kind of cover them on a very high level here and then entertain any questions you have. And so seeing a nodding of heads, we'll plunge forward. Jeff and I will kind of tag team this and alternate different areas, if that works for you. So the first area we looked at is relatively straightforward. This is a request to go back and revisit walk zones that we had prior to April 10th of 2018, shrinking walk zones by a 1/4 mile. So this provides a little bit of the history of how we came to the place where we are. We costed that out with our esteemed transportation director, Mr. Scott Lee, who's here and is available to also answer any questions. But if we were to return to walk zones that we had prior to the 2018, reducing walk zones by a 1/4 mile, we would need 13 additional bus driver positions at a total cost of $865,000. And that includes fuel for those buses. It does not include purchase of new buses. Wisely, the transportation team did not sell off the buses that we had in inventory based on the reductions in staff. We've maintained those buses so they can be reused, so we don't have that initial acquisition cost. We did want to point out to you in the memo in here that there's some just operational considerations, and this is the case for all of these areas. It's hard to mobilize within a couple months. And so we wanted to kind of note that although we think we got close to market rates back a year ago when we increased bus driver pay, it's a moving target, and inflation continues to chug along at a very high level, and we see employers all of the 1970s kind of leap over themselves to offer higher and higher salaries to keep pace with that inflation and to draw workers in a very tight labor market. So I can't say that we're any longer at market for bus driver pay, And then in addition, again, we've got to wait to make decisions, and when we wait till early June to pass a budget, that gives us very little time to reconfigure routes, to rebid those routes among our drivers and be ready for the first day of school. So those are some of the challenges, even if you wanted to go in this direction, we wanted to make you aware of.
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. Really quick, just as a reminder to everyone, so we're not going to be, we could, but it would not be my recommendation that we weigh in on these analyses. These are going to be carried forward as we get finality to our budget, and we also see what's recommended from the strategic plan, and it'll be part of that game of Tetris that we play. Okay, so we're not deciding on these individually, although we could certainly provide feedback on them about what we might want to see in revision. But we're not voting these up or down at the moment. These are going to pull forward. With that said, related to walk zones, one thing I do want to point out is that if pay increases for our staff were something that were a part of the new budget that we agree with our bargaining groups, then those salaries would raise up by whatever percentage or amount would be applicable to that group. So just want to offer that. With that said, I see Trustee Westlake and then Vice President Nicolette.
Thank you, President Smith. I was just wondering, is there some hard data where we could see the correlation with decreasing the walk zone and being able to mobilize and get kids to school in relationship to absenteeism? Because if kids are in the classroom, they're learning something. But I was just wondering if there is a correlation when we had the reduced, maybe look at the reduced walk zone, and then when we increased the walk zone, did absenteeism increase?
I'll just say, I don't know if we have any specific data on that point, although I'd invite Scott to come up here and add anything. But we absolutely did see, we went to the hub system, actually the rotation system. So I think this is before you were on the board. Unfortunately, because of the lack of drivers, we had to go to a rotation system where 1 week out of the year, or 1 week out of the month, an area was not served by our transportation department, our buses. And for certain areas of the district, for sure, when we didn't provide bus service, we saw absenteeism rise, specifically at schools that had a heavy percentage of at-risk students or other issues. And so that was absolutely the case when we went to, unfortunately, we had to that rotation system. So I would imagine there would be some correlation here, but I don't know that we have any specific data we can point to in terms of walk zones. But you're absolutely correct. You need to get the kids to school, right? And when they lack transportation, you have real problems with absenteeism.
Thank you for that. And so that leads me to another question. You just mentioned the at-risk areas. Maybe we shouldn't be looking at this as a cookie cutter situation where all the walk zones are reduced, but we look at the at-risk areas, the lower income areas, where we even reduce the walk zone more. And then we have the walk zones in other areas, the more affluent areas, and not at risk. We leave them alone, but maybe our money would be more well spent if we concentrate on the areas that are at risk and try and get more of those kids to school. I don't know how that plays in with equity. Maybe that's not.
So I'll wait. So I appreciate the idea. It gets difficult. For one, we even have some schools that are entirely walk zones. So some of our elementary schools that are in higher density living arrangement areas, including many of our Title I schools, are entirely walk zones. Anderson Elementary, one of my schools, is one of them, and I have quite a few in District D. Where it gets tough is where this came from, and the reason why I was championing it, although today is not the day that will decide whether it lives or dies, is that a board in the past had to make a very difficult decision, and it's one that I believe that they made a reasonable call on. The promise at the time is that a future board would revisit this, because a 5-year-old walking in the dark to school from any neighborhood, regardless of what's considered what in terms of socioeconomic status, is still a 5-year-old walking to school. And the decision was made as cost cutting, which I understand and is reasonable, but it was not based on safety, and it was not based on getting kids to school for their education. And so that's why I kind of carried it forward. So again, today is not the day that we'll vote it up or down, but I do think that any parent with children in these extended zones for elementary and middle would reasonably want to get their kids to school. But I see where you're coming from, and it's very creative. So I appreciate that. Okay. Dr. Nicolette says she's good. So Trustee Church.
I want to piggyback on that. I kind of one size fits all, and I'd like, we're not going to vote on it, but I'd like the staff to consider, and the superintendent to consider. It differs. Sun Valley and my district, Hunsberger, often lack sidewalks. The sidewalks are covered with snow. In my day in San Diego, I had to walk uphill in the snow both ways. So that's different than other schools that don't have that. And a school that maybe crosses McCarran Boulevard to get there is different than a school that just has residential streets. There's no one size fits all. So I do think staff needs to look at it on a case-by-case basis. And I really liked your comment, Mr. Mathers, about, and I think you said leapfrogging, the salaries leapfrogging. I met this morning with the superintendent offline, and she understands my belief that there's other incentives money is not the only answer. It's an answer, but it's not the only answer to making employees want to come here and stay here. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll add on. I like where you're going with that. And so I certainly don't want to speak to Mr. Lee, who got tapped on the shoulder. But I'm willing to bet that if in the future this was something that the board moved on, the district would do a needs-based assessment and then would implement, because to their point, we can't just make these bus drivers appear. We could certainly direct that they do a needs-based assessment and then roll this out based on where our most critical needs are. And again, that's not to put anyone higher or lower, but in recognition of the fact that some kids are trying to get to school in areas without. So I'm willing to bet that staff would do a needs-based assessment and then we would execute based on that need and all of the things. So I see where you're going with that. All right, I think that we're good on this item, although I appreciate that Mr. Lee was ready. Was what I said okay? Was I good? All right, I'm getting the smile. All right, I think we can move on.
Okay, we'll move on to the school police and middle schools. So currently, we have high schools with an assigned officer. Then each high school has a patrol officer in that area that responds to calls at middle schools and elementary schools. So coverage currently in middle schools is limited. Working with our chief and deputy chief of school police, we looked at a few different options here to provide service or officer services at middle schools. Option A would require 20 additional police officers. That would provide 1 officer at each middle school and 4 rovers. We would also need 2 sergeants and 2 dispatchers to handle the calls and supervision of those officers. And then options B through D are listed below here. Each of those would require 8 additional police officer positions to provide coverage at all of our middle schools, and then another sergeant for supervision and dispatcher to handle those additional calls. Here you can see the various costs of each of those options, and then just like bus drivers, there's other operational considerations to consider. First, due to a tight labor market, we have a lack of lateral transfers, so experienced officers from other agencies, which has made it tough to fill our positions now. I think we currently have 4 officer vacancies. Last year we did create recruit positions for the current budget, which would allow us to fill a recruit position where we have a vacant officer position, put an officer through a recruit through the academy and get them trained up and have them become an officer here. But with that, we're still limited to 2 officers per year, so that would make it difficult in hiring these new officers. And then another consideration or alternative would be to consider campus supervisors. These are non-school police positions that we have at some high schools and middle schools right now, to provide additional supervision at those sites.
All right, I have some thoughts on this, but I know that our originator was Trustee Westlake, so I'd love for you to go first.
Okay, thank you, President Smith. My first question would be, what exactly is the campus supervisor? What does that role look like? Because I'm, again, new, not familiar. So what is like the job description? What are they performing at the school? And then I'm just going to say it again. I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse, but we have to do something. I mean, I see all these roadblocks, the cost, the getting recruits, getting them trained. We can't just throw our hands in the air and say this is insurmountable, because I feel in my heart that we just have to do this. We have to have safety for our kids, and we've got to start somewhere, and the sooner the better, and the faster the better. The more bodies we can get in there, I feel our kids are going to be in a safer environment. And it doesn't have to be a punitive thing. I'm looking at this as being a positive role model, visible in the schools, that the teachers see, that the kids see, that the administration see, that our public sees we are doing something. Thank you.
So Trustee Westlake, to answer your question about the job description, I'll just give a brief description of what the campus supervisors do. Those positions supervise and monitor the behavior of students who are outside of class and at school-sponsored activities. These positions are responsible for the enforcement of applicable district and school rules and assist in the maintenance of an orderly and safe campus. And they report directly to the school administrators.
Yeah, and I like that. I mean, so we hear stories about kids walking the hallways during the day, and teachers can't be chasing them down, and administrators are also doing other things. So I'm very intrigued by this. I have some thoughts on this topic, but I want to, again, defer to Trustee Westlake.
Thank you. I wanted to add to that, if we were to go a lot more with that route, the campus supervisor positions. I was at Hug High School when classes were getting out and they were going to classes. And so now with the description, I think I saw at least one individual. I was walking the inside of the building with Principal Aronos. We need more than just one or two with a campus that large. And to no fault of the admin at high school, God love them, they're doing the best they can. But we were in the open foyer and it was a mob and no one was going anywhere. Not even with the principal saying, okay, that was the warning bell, and other teachers walking around saying, get to school. No one was moving. If they're not moving, they're not in class, they're not learning.
Thanks, Trustee Westlake. I see you, Trustee Church, but I want to add. So I'm very interested in this analysis. And I'm, personally interested in variations on option B through D. Not that we're choosing one today, but again, this is an area where we may be able to give some feedback, and then different analyses could really come forward based on that feedback. And this may be where I'd like to hear from our chief. I'm going to just tell my colleagues right now, I am very wary of us choosing an option that definitively places officers in certain areas, because at the end of the day, it really goes to our chief and our superintendent to be responsible for this, the service of safety in our schools. I'm very interested in the idea of campus monitors fitting into an evolved version of the analysis, but at the end of the day, as a trustee and the president, I'm going to be looking to our chief of police to say, these are the recommendations that we have so that you have a flexible model that meets what you need in order to provide the service of safety at our schools.
Thank you very much. So in looking at these options, going back to what Mark said earlier, a lot of this really stems from not funding more police positions years and years and years ago. The staffing levels have been flat for pretty much since I've been in school police. I think 06, 07 was the last time we had a major increase, and it was pretty minor at that point. But with that being said, there are several options we've looked at here. The biggest hurdle that we've had is obviously, we currently have some open positions now. We're still trying to rebuild from the hiring freeze during COVID. That really put us behind where we needed to be for our staffing at the time. So we're still kind of trying to dig out of that hole. And then, like Mark has laid out here with the budget and salary and all those types of things that continue to go up at the other agencies around us, it really made it hard to recruit laterals, which is what we'd always done in the past. Because in our department, as it was outlined in the memo from Mr. Mathers, is we don't have any overlap. So like when a teacher calls in sick, they get a sub. We don't have that option. So when an officer calls in sick or gets injured or goes on vacation, we're just down that position. There is no one to fill that position. At a traditional policing agency, like when I worked at the sheriff's office, I worked graveyard, and so if somebody on day shift called in sick, I could hold over for 4 hours after my shift to cover part of their shift. Then someone from swing shift would come in early to cover the other 4 hours. So you could use overtime to cover those shortages. We don't have that option here because we all work a day shift. So in looking at the various models, there is also another position that Deputy Chief Price this was his idea and has been diligent working on it the last few weeks since this was initial plan was worked out. But he discovered that there's a CTE police program that is approved by the state of Nevada, and the CTE department is actually implementing the firefighter program currently, and so Deputy Chief Price has been working with those coordinators on the possibility of implementing a police program, which kind of the grow your own theory, right? If we can get them interested here while we have them as students, how do we can maybe bring them along? But then the catch is they can't become post-certified until they're 21 years old. They have to be 21 to be a police officer. So what do you do during that gap year? So again, Deputy Chief Price put a lot of work into this and has a really solid plan. It's not going to solve the problem today, but it is moving forward as well with another option we kind of wanted to talk about, which would be basically a community services officer position, which would not be a sworn officer position. This would be modeled loosely off the models like Reno PD has their CSOs, the Sheriff's Office has their field support specialists, Sparks PD has, I forget the name that they use. But working backwards on this model, if we can get the CTE police program implemented, get them involved there while we have them in high school, start them as doing internships with school police, and then once they graduate high school, we could bring them right into this CSO position, and we could get them out working for us. And then as they get closer to that 21 years of age, they could then apply for a recruit position. We put them in the police academy, they graduate, boom, then they become an officer. So you basically have student to intern to CSO to police kind of track, if you will. Again, that's not going to solve our problem today, but looking ahead in the future, it seems super viable, and it would be, I think, beneficial to our district. Working back forwards from that, though, the CSO position could be potentially hired now with just regular employees for a new position that could help ease that burden, if you will. So going back to when somebody calls in sick or we don't have that position filled, that one patrol officer that's trying to cover multiple middle schools and multiple elementary schools, they also have responsibilities for that high school campus officer who's on that campus. So if that campus officer has evidence, for example, that needs to be taken here to the evidence lockup, they don't have a way to get it here. Their patrol officer has to go pick it up and then bring it here, book it into evidence, and then go back out to their patrol beat. So as you can imagine, if you're in Galena beat or something like that, you're coming out of your way to get here to the central office. That's a perfect example of a job that a CSO could do. CSO could drive over to the school, pick up the evidence, drive it over here, book it. That leaves the officer out on the road to handle police calls. So it would take a lot of the burden off of the staff that we currently have for officers. So it would ease the workload on our current staffing, which would help while we're trying to rebuild our numbers and potentially staff these models that we've presented for you here today. So when it comes to the actual models, yeah, there's a lot of things to look at, a lot of possibilities. Other than option A, the gold plan, if you will. When you start looking at options B, C, and D, we really, in looking at it, option D feels the best to us because it gives us the flexibility that President Smith was talking about with those rovers in there. Because one of the issues you're going to run into is if you take option D, for example, and you look at Cold Springs, O'Brien, and Trainer, once they get used to having an officer there, they're going to be used to having an officer there. So if that officer calls in sick or is injured or is out on vacation or something, they're going to expect that same level of service. Having those rovers would hopefully allow us to have some more flexibility to plug those rovers into those spots if one of those officers is out, and hopefully lessen the impact on those school communities. So option D would be the one that we think is probably the most feasible. And then as we would work to phase these in, 2 per year is pretty reasonable based on current hiring, on how hard it is to hire recruits, not just for us, for all the law enforcement agency here in this valley and across the country. So 2 would be reasonable. There is a possibility if the stars, shone above us and the sunlight comes through that we could potentially do up to 4 if we were able to get 2 spaces in the academy here and then 2 spaces in Carson City at their academy. There is a possibility that we would do that, and obviously we would try to do that, but I think 2 is probably a good, solid number to look at. So as we work to build those up, we would bring those officers on as rovers, and then once we had 4 or 6 of them, then we would start assigning them out to the schools specifically. But we would just break the middle schools down into middle school beats.
That's excellent. So Trustee Church, I see you, and then Westlake. So just as a reminder, we've already voted to have them do these analyses, which means that based on this conversation, when we see these analyses, because they're still going to keep forward, they can revise them. We don't need to take another vote in order to do that. All we've done is ask for it. So that feedback is very good, and it seems like I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. So in a future analysis that comes back, maybe we could see what campus monitors look like. We could see about these CSOs. So if your department continues to refine what this analysis looks like and what it is you'd like to ask and show the board, that's something you can do, and we don't actually need to make a motion for that. So we have these options, and they can still bring other ideas based on this feedback, because we've already voted on wanting to see this as an option, okay? So Trustee Church.
All right. Where do I start? First of all, I read the report in detail, and it's excellent. I really, seriously, that answered so many questions. It was extremely well written, and it spelled out where we currently have our officers, and I expressed offline a little opinion on some of that, and I'm retired Reno PD supervisor, so that folks know. I loved it. First of all, I think the major idea of doing any massive hiring and or specifically assigning them somewhere, I think that's DOA. It's just not possible. So possibly hiring 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, if we have the money, great idea. But even better, I like the CSO idea. Now, I can't, in my mind, see having a campus supervisor and a CSO. I would kind of see that melding together, but I could be wrong. But I love the idea of having some kind of a CSO program. And while that might be students, obviously that's open to anybody. There might be, just for example, retired military, who would be interested in that position. So it wouldn't necessarily be a required stepping stone to full-time sworn employment, but it could be, and certainly our retired military people generally are very well qualified to stepping stone into a sworn position. One minor thing I've noted in my history, sending a CSO to the academy saves a little bit of money, as opposed to calling them a police officer, paying them police officer wages in the academy. You send them to the academy as a CSO, and you've saved a few. I see a smile there. You see a few $1,000s, save a few $1,000s. So, excellent report. I love the idea of CSOs and or more campus supervisors. They're also easier to recruit, much cheaper on PERS, all these other raising costs. And one final comment, if and when we have them, or the campus supervisors, I would love to see their start of the day duty being on the bus. I'd like them to see it be them on the bus for order and discipline, so that the bus driver can do their job. Then when they arrive at the campus, they transition into that campus position. But I have seen that elsewhere. Thank you.
All right. We still have 2 more analyses to get through and the end of the presentation, but Trustee Westlake, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I love the idea of us having our own academy. I think that is an amazing thing for our young people to have that ability and that career opportunity. I would just like it to continue looking into that. The cost, if it would be where we would foot the cost for the cadet, or if the cadet would pay to the academy and then there would be a bonus at the end of the academy. Whatever that looked at, that I leave that up to the professionals. But these ideas are amazing. Thank you so much.
To be clear on that, we're not going to run our own police academy.
No, just.
Correct. So the CTE program wouldn't be a police academy. It'd be one of our technical education programs in the school, like we currently have, like culinary arts. They have the computer animation, all that type of stuff. So that would be basically a program to get them interested in almost like an explorer program that normally would occur after school hours, which has kind of died off over the years because kids are so busy they don't have time for it. So this would give them the opportunity to be involved in law enforcement with the school district police department during their school day as part of their curriculum.
Yeah, it's building a pathway, and I see Trustee Mayberry. Look right.
I'll be brief. I know we have a lot to go over still. I'll be brief. Thank you for this. I just liked everybody's comments. I certainly support more law enforcement as well. I want to get that on the record. I don't have a real strong opinion on how they're deployed. You know the greatest need, the greatest risk. So thank you for that. The question I have is there a sort of a benefit in terms of recruitment for school police, in terms of the hours they work, a large majority of the summer being off? Is there some message there that we communicate?
Absolutely there is. And so most of us that came over here as laterals had to weigh that into the factor, because like when I came over here, I took a significant pay cut, not only in salary, but also the benefits here were a lot more expensive with a lot less coverage from when I came from the county. So that is a factor that everyone that's come over as a lateral has had to balance, is like, how much of a pay cut can my family afford to take in order to receive these other benefits? And the reality of it is over the last several years, the gap has just gotten so large between the agencies and us that it's just too much to gap. The biggest issue with it is we can't match salaries for a lateral coming over. So if you were, say the highest step we can do is a step 5, and that has to be if you actually have 5 years at your other agency. But most of the other agencies are making more on a step 2 than our step 5 is. So, for instance, if you're an officer at another agency and you're only 2 years on the job there, you're making more than our step 5 is, and I can't even offer you a step 5 because you don't have 5 years of experience. So I can only give you up to 5 years of matching experience to get our steps. So that's really where the gap and the disparity comes into play. Okay. If we were able to match salary to salary, something close like, so like for instance, I'm just throwing out easy numbers, but for instance, if it's a $10, you're making $10 more an hour there at a step 4, which equated to a step 9 for us. If I was able to bring them over to step 9 to get closer to that pay, that would help us with recruitment a ton.
And when you talk about laterals, you're talking about, say, you're with some other agency, a Reno Police Department officer, and you're moving to Washoe County School District Police. That's a lateral.
Correct. Yeah. So a lateral is someone who's already Nevada Post Category 1 certified, so they could work for Reno Sparks, Washoe, Elko PD, Lander County Sheriff's Office, anywhere in the state that they're certified as a Category 1. And then when we bring them in, the benefit to the district is they immediately start work, they immediately go into our training program, and then we can turn them over a lot quicker. To get someone through a police academy and then through their FTO program, it's easily 6 months before we actually see them on the job being productive, versus if I hire you in your Category 1 today, I can get you into the FTO program tomorrow, and in 12 weeks from now, you're on your own.
If they're successful.
Correct.
Okay, and I should add that one, I think, theme that you'll see in all these memos as we worked with departments was that in so many cases we will not be able to make a huge change in staffing. Either we would end up cannibalizing our own staff, or in this case there's just not the number of individuals we could pull into that agency while competing with other law enforcement agencies. So one of the themes we kind of bring out at the end of each memo is consideration of a phasing that would go on, and that could be complemented with the CSO or campus supervisor alternatives as well. So I just wanted to point that out. Our third area, actually, the next two areas are actually, I think, more complex to get through. I'll probably be phoning a friend here as you have questions about each of these areas. They were somewhat combined at our last meeting, and then I think the board wisely kind of separated them out. The first area here concerns learning facilitators and a possible expansion of those positions to all elementary schools. And then the second issue was the standalone principal issue. So I'm going to go through this fairly lightly because there's a lot of data in the memo. There's an attached PowerPoint from Mr. Ernst that was provided that gets into some of the educational kind of issues that I can't speak to. So I'll just kind of cover this very quickly, and then if you have questions, I think, again, Mr. Parks or Mr. Ernst would be able to answer those questions. So the first slide, and in the memo, we provide a history of funding of literacy specialists that then kind of evolved into the learning facilitator position. And you can see how that's waxed and waned over the years as the state added programs, then cut or eliminated the programs during difficult financial times. And so where we stand right now is we have 20 learning facilitators that are budgeted out of our at-risk fund, and then we have 45 ESSER funded positions that end in 22-23. So we go back down to the 20 facilitators that were funded for. And so I think that was the genesis of the board's concern, right? What about those 45 schools that lose an LF, let alone the other schools that don't have an LF. So again, we costed out different options, which you can see here on this slide. Option A really is kind of a status quo option, not really an option. Option B is, again, funding those 45 LFs out of a different funding source, and the cost of that would be $4.5 million. And again, in recognition of our difficulties in recruiting, wrinkle to option B would be some kind of outsourcing or use of retired teachers as a critical need. Again, cost very equivalent, $4.5 million or so, to have an LF at each and every elementary school. Again, there's lots of good information about kind of the work LFs have done over the last year or two, and many of the issues that go into their work. We hope the memo went into that to the degree you needed, but we're here to answer any questions you would have.
I'll be brief. I don't have any questions. I just want to thank the staff for preparing this. It was very comprehensive, and the work and the research does not go unnoticed from this trustee. Thank you.
Trustee Nicolette here. Thank you for this. And it makes me sad, and I'm going to tell you why when I look at slide 24. It must be, this one. And I was afraid of this. I am for each school having a highly trained learning facilitator. I, across the board, hear wonderful things about how they contribute to helping the administrative staff, coaching teachers, going into classrooms with particular students and helping the teacher and the student get through some challenging issues. And then on B, I see but also pull 45 teacher from classroom positions. And so I guess that's just kind of like that's probably what would happen. And I don't know how to balance that because it doesn't seem like it is a good idea. I mean, talk to me about, maybe, Joe, if you could talk to me about this. How would we manage that if we put an LF, 45 more? How would we manage that? And the other question would be is what kind of training and professional development do we provide our LFs so they can hit the pavement running?
Thank you, Trustee Nicolette. I do think that is the compelling question here, is we've really made a commitment to making sure that every classroom has a high-quality teacher in front of them. And as we look at our decisions, there's always trade-offs on each side. And I think that when we look at this and we think about 45 elementary school classrooms, perhaps having a substitute teacher or something of that nature, that becomes a pretty compelling point. And so really the pool of teachers that we would draw from in very large part would be master elementary school teachers. As far as the training, that's an interesting question as we kind of look at this, because we know that COVID has had many impacts. One of those is around professional learning for educational staff. And we are, as organization, looking at that in detail. And there is an investment that goes into our learning facilitators in terms of the training they get so they can then turn around and train staffs. And you get some kind of exponential scaling that occurs in that situation. And I think when we get these kind of interruptions in it, it can mitigate some of the training that has gone into the learning facilitators themselves.
Yeah. May I continue? Thank you. So I happen to know that there are principals that are very worried about losing their LFs. Mm-hmm. Having said that, how are we going to redistribute, and are we redistributing current LFs that have proven success, and a school that is has a very high-risk population. If they're losing their LF, they might be losing their dean, they may not have a dean. How are we addressing their needs? Because I worry about that taking away from without some kind of support.
Okay, thank you again, Trustee Nicolette. So when you look at the 20 learning facilitators that will remain, those will remain at schools that have been least successful in academic performance. So when we've looked at them, there's various designations, CSI and TSI, Comprehensive School Improvement, Targeted School Improvement. And in large part, when we looked at and worked with our Office of Teachers of TLL, that we made sure to consider prioritizing the most in-need schools for those learning facilitators. So that was the first part, I think, of your question. The second part of your question was about the investment, I think, that's gone into current learning facilitators and then their role in terms of going back maybe into classrooms. And I would say as we continue to work with our principals, we know that there's often a lot of wisdom within the walls. And so while they may not be able to fully function in an LF capacity only, I think that they will still be able to provide some professional learning based on the professional learning that they've received over the past couple of years during an early release Wednesday. It won't be to the same level and being able to get into classes for observations and more of that one-to-one type coaching, but I think they will be tapped into to be able to at least work with that wisdom within the walls and do some training to the whole staff.
Separating, I guess, desire and reality. So as we continue to grow our workforce, and in this case, teachers, we can continually revisit those schools that might be a little marginal that we know could benefit from a highly trained learning facilitator. We can, I guess, in our budgeting, look at a pot of money that we can continue to grow this, I guess, this support.
Not wanting to speak for Mr. Mathers, but certainly in respect to the question itself, I think as a school district, we're always and continually looking at how schools are performing, and then based on that overall performance, working to match resources to help with the needs that they may have in the building. To that larger pot of money or that continual revisiting, it seems like it would be something that we'll be doing in an ongoing basis.
Wonderful. I will take that as a beautiful promise.
I'll also add that in the fourth analysis, which we're going to get to next, there's some layering here because building learning facilitators play a role in that fourth analysis as well. And then Trustee Westlake wanted to add something quickly.
Thank you, President Smith. I'm going to go really fast. Does it have to be either or? Can we pull some of the teachers? Can we get some retired teachers and not make it such a big chunk out of each category? The other thing is I do have a couple of schools where they are losing their learning facilitators because they were at the bottom of the barrel and they've struggled to get to the top, all to lose their learning facilitator, which means that they're probably going to go right through the grinder and then their nose is going to be underwater again. So I think we really need to think about that. Is there a way to the teachers that could be a learning facilitator, instead of pulling them, give them a bonus to work extra hours to set up programs and have this bonus because they're kind of filling in the shoes of a learning facilitator. They're giving support to staff. They're running programs maybe during the summer for teachers to attend, things like that, but they are rewarded with I wouldn't say a pay increase because I know it goes by tiers, but they get a bonus for doing that. Done.
That was in record time. I think that a lot of your questions might also be answered when we get into the fourth analysis, because then we start to layer on the ideas of which schools have a learning facilitator, which schools have a second administrative position, and then how do we fill those gaps. So it could be extended into the fourth analysis too. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Joe, or
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Ernst.
Thank you, Trustee Smith. So, yeah, I think Trustee Westlake, to the point around being able to rise up and then the supports are taken away. That, unfortunately, has been an age-old dilemma in education for a long period of time. So that point is noted and well received. I also think that we continue to seek clarity on overall legislation and various guidelines around LFs. If you, as noted in some of the information that had been presented, at one time we had LFs that indeed were stipend. And so we stipend them for the additional responsibilities above and beyond the classroom teacher. And so I think to the point of doesn't always have to be an either or, and finding something that tries to meet the needs of most is definitely a part of this consideration.
yeah, I very much like that. Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the last analysis, and that was looking at the elimination of standalone principals. So the reasons behind this were when we have several elementary and a K through 8 school that don't have a secondary administrator backup position when that principal is out for leave or professional development. So there's just no backup there. And a burden on the administrator at those schools of how much time they're doing administrative functions. So we looked at current staffing. We do have some deans and assistant principal positions that are either fully or partially funded by Title I or special education funds. We did not include those positions in this analysis because those funding sources are set aside for specific duties. So what we're looking at here is just those general fund and the ESSER funded pipeline positions. So if we look at the next school year, right now, 29 of our 66 elementary schools either have an assistant principal or dean budgeted for next year. And then if we were to expand the criteria for who that backup person is to a non-classroom person, a learning facilitator would fall under that category. So if we expand it to there, 42 of our 66 elementary schools would have some sort of backup or support for principals next year. And then again, there's a variety of options here. Option A being creating a flex position for the schools that don't currently have an assistant principal, dean, or learning facilitator, for them to choose which type of position they would want there. Option B would be to create a fixed dean position at each elementary school, just to ensure that there's always a backup administrator at that school. And then option C is just continuing the ESSER funded pipeline, or that number of positions beyond the term of the ESSER funding, which is the fall or this upcoming school year. Would shift costs to the general fund in FY25 and beyond. Again, similar to the learning facilitators, all of these require new positions that would potentially pull teachers out of the classroom for the next school year.
And so on that, I'll jump in. So I would imagine if the board does adopt any of these, this would be just like bus drivers. It would be just like school police. We would triage, walk zones. Everything is about triaging. I mean, it wouldn't be about pulling people out of classrooms immediately. We would have to do this in a thoughtful way so that all of a sudden, 24-second grades don't go poof and miss their teacher. So any of these implementations, it doesn't matter what it is, there would have to be good, solid thought into how we phase into the implementation of all of this. So I'll just say that I would assume. So just so that no one knows, it's not even in the community. because of the way budgeting works with the money this year and the funding and then our adoption of the budget, these people don't just fall from the sky and are immediately ready effective August 14th. So there would have to be a phased approach with this. I think that this was very well done. I very much appreciate how you went the extra layer of not just looking at which schools have the AP or the dean, but you also factored in the building learning facilitators, because I have heard from many principals that that is exactly the position they want. So in your option A, I like the idea that you are providing the option of choice in self-determination so that the site-based leaders can indicate the role that they actually need. So I appreciate the way that this analysis was done, and when the time comes, which is not now, I feel like this is the right kind of information when this board has to put together all the Tetris pieces. Vice President Nicolette.
Thank you. Yeah, this was a deep dive, and I truly appreciate it. So two questions. Can you define that flex allocations, and how does that look on an operational level? And then is there a possibility of, one of the things that I constantly hear is how deans are used differently and effectively. It kind of depends, discipline. And one of the things I worry about, having been in a situation where I had too many people to evaluate, principals having to evaluate and be the school, leader, and having to evaluate 25 people is, well, it's not very effective. And so is there a way that we can create the dean position to also be a co-evaluator of teachers?
I can respond to that. So, and unfortunately, Dr. Mason isn't here. Maybe Troy or Lauren. My understanding is it's a matter of certification. You have to be a licensed administrator to evaluate. Not all of our deans are, so that would be why they would not be able to if that were the case. But I'll let Dr. Park.
Yeah, for the record, Troy Parks, Chief Academic Officer. I would concur. I believe the NRS specifically states that you have to be a licensed administrator, and I'm almost certain that's per the negotiated bargaining agreement, that it has to be a licensed administrator that evaluates teachers. We often utilize teacher coaches and master teachers to support the coaching process, but when it comes to formal summative evaluation, it must be an administrator, I believe.
I like where we're going with this, though. So let's just say the board were to make a commitment like this. Is that some of the growth towards what deans could do? So, because again, I understand why we haven't had them be licensed administrators up to this point, and honestly, it's not consistently applied. If a variation of this were adopted, we would be creating a longer-term commitment to these roles, and so possibly that could be something that could be built towards.
Can I just ask a clarifying question? So, but licensure, the decision to get the admin licenses is the individual's decision. So they may not want it. Do you see what I'm saying? So we may have a dean, and please correct me. I see Lauren's my touchstone here. She's nodding. She's going to get up and correct me. But my understanding is that we can have a dean who can provide lots of support in the building, but absent that licensure, cannot do the evaluation. I think, what?
I think they can do 5 assigned evaluations. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Lauren.
Thank you. You are correct. Right now, the deans can shadow, they can coach, but they are not the signer on the evaluation. Yes, we can create a position that puts a different title, so to speak, for the deans to be able to do evaluations and grow that as something in the future. We absolutely can do that and look at that. In another county in our state, deans are administrators, and they do perform evaluations with a different type of pay. So they're on the administrative side, not on the teacher side. Our current deans fall under the teacher association contract.
Very good. So just like we were talking about, like we don't need to take another vote on this, but with the school police, this could also emerge in other variations of the analysis that this board will see. So that's why this is a very helpful conversation, because we would also potentially be making a long-term commitment to these roles. So as we consider these analyses, it can come back and look a little different to us based on this feedback. Okay, thank you so much. And Vice President Nicolette, you're just hitting the balls out of the park today. The benefits of having a decades and decades long educator in our midst.
May
Wonderful.
I just say, President Smith, it's kind of easy when you have a room full of experts, and I mean that sincerely. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everyone. So let's go ahead and let's bring this home. And then as a reminder, we are going to still need, we're going to take public comment because this is an item for action. So we're going to wrap this up. We're going to immediately go to public comment. And then we are going to need a motion to at least make those decisions about the tentative budget, which we are required to file, even though it's going to look very different in June.
Yep. So I'm not going to cover each and every fund group here. You've seen the numbers here. These are all balanced budgets. I would note on the capital project side, you will see the 5-year capital improvement plan next meeting. We, for the sake of just having a tentative budget again completed, we used the first year of the CIP to build the capital project fund budgets. So if you have any questions about any of these funds, certainly we're happy to answer them. Slide 34 gives a summation of our entire budget. You can see we're nearing 1.5 billion as the total amount of appropriations. And again, just gives you a summary. You see other information in your packet and certainly in the attachments. I won't repeat kind of the budget process. You know it well at this point. Again, hold on to your hat as we get through the second half of the legislative session, and we'll bring a final budget to you in late May, and then we'll very likely do an amended final budget in late June based on what the legislature does after completion of the final budget. So as the President noted, we need a vote for approval of the tentative budget in order to file it or to have any adjustments that we'll make before filing on the 15th. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and let's make sure that we open it up for public comment, just because I know somewhere Neil is watching us in this building.
I have none for this item.
Okay, very good. So we've done that. All right, team, we've covered a lot of ground, and the good part is we asked our questions along the way with this. So just as a reminder, all of these parts and pieces, except for the critical needs, okay, because if we pass the tentative budget, it does mean that we are approving those, and that would be carried forward into future budgets. But all those other parts and pieces in conversation will continue to come back until it's time to put everything together. Are there any other clarifying questions or thoughts? Again, knowing we covered a lot of ground here over the past hour and a half. Nope. I see Vice President Nicolette, because otherwise we're going to move towards a motion.
I am ready to make a motion.
There we go.
I move that the Board of Trustees approves the tentative budget for fiscal year 2023-2024.
Second.
Motion by Vice President Nicolette, seconded by Trustee Woodley. Is there any discussion on the motion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, nay. All right, motion carries 6-0. Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of item 2.02, and we will go to item 3, or section 3, our closing items. Is there closing public comment, JJ, for item 3.01?
I have none.
Okay, very good. So on that note, at 12:32 p.m., I will close this special meeting of the Board of Trustees. Thank you so much.